All right. Thank you for everyone, fellow supervisors, too. And I actually want to first remarks on my item is congratulate Supervisor Patello. He had a very, very fought contest for his reelection. Hot fought. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming to the June 9th meeting of the Board of Supervisors here in San Benito County. Pledge allegiance. I will lead them. Can you please stand up?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Acknowledge certificate of posting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so certificate of posting was signed. Louis, it was signed? Okay. Regular agenda items, Board of Supervisors. In behalf of the Board of Supervisors and our chairperson, Robert Rivas, I'd like to welcome the members of the community who have attended today's meeting and discussion on energy, so alternative energy. And I also would like to hope that there's other members who will be coming from the public. And I know we do have some dignitaries on the audience. We got Tony from San Juan Bautista, and we got Chris, right? Chris, and David, right? David? Rick. Oh, that's right, Rick. Hi, Rick. Thank you for coming. And then we have members of the staff. Thank you very much. That's $5, Anthony.
I know, no kidding.
Yeah. And for staff, that'll be $10. Okay. All right, moving on. I'd like to introduce and welcome Carol Johnson with the Santa Cruz County General Services, who will be facilitating today's meeting. Carol?
Thank you, and thank you for hosting this session of the Monterey Bay Community Power Special Study Session. Today, we'll hear from experts in the field of community choice energy, the goals and recommendations of the Project Development Advisory Committee. You'll hear them referred to today as PDAC, the results of the recent technical study, the legal financial aspects of forming a CCE JPA, and after the presentation, our presenters and speakers will be available for questions. Also outside, there were cards, so if you have questions during the meeting, you can fill out the card with your question. We'll try and get it addressed during the meeting. If not, be sure and put your email address on it, and we will get back to you with a follow-up in the next week or so. Right now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Santa Cruz County Supervisor Bruce McPherson. Since 2012, Supervisor McPherson has been on the board for the County of Santa Cruz. Between 1993 and 2004, he served 2 terms in the California State Senate, as well as 2 terms in the California State Assembly. And in 2005, he was confirmed as the Secretary of State. He is also a 4th-generation Santa Cruz native. At this time, Supervisor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's really nice to be here. It's a great area that I once was proudly represented when I was in the California State Senate. It's nice to be here. About just over 3 years ago, shortly after I was elected, I looked into the prospect of this community power aggregation, as they call it. We have changed it to community power energy, a little more understandable that way, I think. And we said, let's look at this. And I was looking at it from as most agencies have done in Marin and Sonoma County. And you'll hear from some representatives from Sonoma County who have been tremendously important. They went out 5-6 years ago, a couple years ago, and really took charge of this and initiated the program to see how it would work countywide. But when I looked at it from a perspective of who we could serve, I said, I feel very comfortable with the people I I served for previously in the Senate. So I said, let's ask the communities of Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. Those 3 counties and each and every one of the 18 cities, after we made a first round of talks of interest, they each responded, yeah, we're interested in this. Let's take a look at it. So we now have 21 agencies and 3 resources agencies as well that are interested in seeing what this might bring about. Now we have, after this 3 years, a feasibility study that's been completed of 100 page with plus appendixes that shows that, yes, we can have a community choice power organization in this 3-county region, and we can double our dependence on renewable resources at the same or less cost than PG&E can. We're really excited about this. It is the most exciting thing I've been associated with, certainly since I've been a county supervisor, but also I think in my public service career in the political scene. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate the aforementioned Project Development Advisory Committee, or PDAC. They have put hundreds, if not collectively thousands of hours into this to make this presentation today. I think it's important to also note that, as I said, being McPherson and a Scotsman, I wanted to be as frugal as possible. We have come to this point without spending one dime of general fund money in any governing agency. Comparatively, other agencies have spent up to $500,000 or $800,000 to get to this point. We did it because we got a grant. We did some fundraising for it, and we got some assistance as an agency, a collective agency, so to speak, from the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz as well. So we've done it right. We think that we have a product or a plan to produce to show you that is going to be well received, not only from the environmental protection from the perspective of environmental protection and natural resources and economics, but also local control. Because if and when this agency is developed and informed, you will provide local control over our power that we provide to our customers at homes and in their businesses. That is half the power that is used in this whole region or throughout the state. The other half is with automobiles. So it's a very, very important thing. We've been very efficient at it. We've reached out. We think that the timeline is such that by this fall we'll have developed by Halloween those parties that might be interested in joining, and by a year from now or a year from the fall, we will have this in order to put in place and provide the service for the people of this Tri-County region. And if and when, and I would like to say when, this comes to fruition with the Tri-County area. It'll be the first Tri-County community choice energy system in the state, and it will be the largest one in California as well. So we've done a lot of work on it. There's many people to thank for us where we are today, to get us to where we are today. I'm really anxious to see how people respond to it. I think the response has been good so far. I'm excited about it. I do have to apologize. I may have to leave in about 30 minutes or an hour to get back to Santa Cruz County. But we heard a presentation. We had a presentation in Santa Cruz County earlier today. But thank you for your interest in this. I think it's something that will be well received in our community and much appreciated. I described it as the most significant program in energy conservation that I've ever been associated with, that we've ever had in this region, I think. So I appreciate your listening to the comments that we have that are going to be presented, and any questions that you might have. So thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Supervisor McPherson. Any questions from the fellow supervisors? No. All right, thank you. Carol?
At this time, I think we have a video to show that was just recently released. Yeah. It will give you an introduction and the basics on community choice energy.
It's not often that a community has a chance to join together to change the world they live in. What if we could create skilled permanent jobs, empower our local community to make its own decisions about where its electricity comes from, and reduce climate warming greenhouse gas emissions? What if we could do it without any new taxes or new costs to local governments, and without raising rates? The moment has arrived. Monterey Bay Community Power is a regional initiative to provide electricity to businesses and residents throughout Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Cruz counties. Using the state-approved Community Choice Energy Model, communities can choose clean power and create jobs. Surplus revenues that would normally flow to PG&E stay local. Customers also benefit from a higher level of accountability because Monterey Bay Community Power will be a local public agency. It's all about choice. Current customers will be able to choose Monterey Bay Community Power or stay with PG&E to provide electricity. Power lines and delivery of electricity will continue to be handled by PG&E, ensuring the same dependability, customer service, and billing process. Monterey Bay Community Power customers will pay for their cleaner electricity through a line item on their PG&E bill. Again, rates will be equivalent to PG&E's. And through Monterey Bay Community Power, our local community will choose where its electricity comes from and how to invest revenue surpluses that currently go to PG&E shareholders.
The best decisions for our community come from our community. The Monterey Bay Community Power Initiative, for the first time, gives Central Coast residents and businesses a choice in where their power comes from, building on the progress we've made in using renewable energy. This initiative will empower our community, increase transparency, and lead to real results in everyday lives.
Monterey Bay Community Power will purchase clean, renewable energy. Nearly 60% of the electricity would come from renewable sources, compared to approximately 30% currently provided by PG&E.
Here at the Monterey Regional Waste Management District, we're turning waste into energy. We take methane gas as it's released from decomposing material in the landfill and convert it into energy through our generators. We are helping to meet a key climate action goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Monterey Bay Community Power will allow our region to increase its use of clean energy sources. Everyone wins, and so does our planet.
While offering rates equivalent to PG&E, Monterey Bay Community Power will keep surplus money in the community, which will help stimulate our local economy by creating numerous jobs that will produce nearly $1.4 billion in estimated total economic output. Monterey Bay Community Power will also establish many permanent operations and maintenance jobs, providing additional estimated annual economic output of $28 million.
Monterey Bay Community Power is based on a proven successful model in the state of California. For example, in 2014, Sonoma County launched Sonoma Clean Power, which in just 1 year reduced its climate emissions by over 40% and saved its customers millions. Wherein Clean Energy is offering its customers a choice of 56 to 100% renewable energy, nearly double the clean power offered by PG&E. These examples, combined with a technical study, point to a very bright future for Monterey Bay Clean Power.
Monterey Bay Community Power offers an opportunity to empower residents and businesses to keep money local and make decisions that deliver economic vitality and cleaner energy for our region and our future. Our moment has arrived.
Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Sean Marshall and Mark Landman, who will discuss how Community Choice Energy works and the activity that's currently going on around the state of California. Sean Marshall is the Executive Director of Lean Energy US, a nonprofit membership organization that assists the other upcoming CCEs in their formation, and also Mark Landman, who's the founding member of the Sonoma Clean Power Board of Directors, and as mayor of the city of Cotati, he led their city council to unanimously support the first CCE in Sonoma County. Sean?
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you very much for having us today. So what I'm going to focus on here in the next few minutes is to just take you through a series of slides that expand a bit on the video you just saw in terms of the mechanics of how the program works and how it would work here in Monterey Bay. So the first is an illustration that we often use just to show how the partnership or the relationship works between the communities, in your case, the 3 counties and hopefully all or some of its cities, to PG&E. So what CCE is that it enables local governments to get together to pool the electricity of their communities and then to partner with the existing utility, in this case PG&E, that continues in the traditional utility role of transmission and distribution of that power into the home, as well as consolidated billing. PG&E also maintains control of the grid and all of the maintenance related to the infrastructure, power infrastructure, so that you or the customer at the end of the day is really experiencing very little in the way of any change in the way that the power is delivered or paid for. But the real change comes in the type of power that is being put on the grid on behalf of your community. So far, CCE has proven to increase renewable energy, dramatically drop greenhouse gas emissions, and offer competitive, most often less expensive electricity rates. Around the country, we see community choice authorized in 7 states. It actually started in the state of Massachusetts in the late 1990s. They paved the way, and then it moved its way west through the Midwest. In California, was enabled by AB 117 in 2002. And then the most recent state to come online is New York. And New York is currently enrolling customers in their first pilot program in Westchester County and soon to move to Sullivan County in New York. Just gives you a sense of where it is. Lots of other states have inquired about it and are looking into authorizing legislation. In California, we have been working on this, or a group of folks have been working on it since Marin Clean Energy launched. I was involved in that, the early days of that program. That program launched in 2010, and then Lean formed in 2011 and has really been, along with other groups, moving around the state to educate about what's happening, what the possibilities are. So now we see well over 20 counties throughout the state, representing hundreds of cities, who are in various phases of either investigation or forming programs that are going to be launching here in the next couple of years. So lots happening. It's a very exciting time to be in this space. Oop. Darn it. 1 second. Guys, I might need your help.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So why are communities interested? Some of this you heard in the video, but I'll just quickly recap. The bottom line is that this is a program that is responsive to both environmental goals, in particular climate action plan goals or any other type of climate-related energy reduction goals that your city and county and your cities might have. But it also responds to local economic goals. And so that really happens in a number of ways. That is a combination of rate savings for your customers, sort of benefiting their pocketbook. It also generates some excess revenue so that you can leverage that excess to partner up with other organizations for either jobs creation, new energy programs, basically localizing an existing revenue stream and bringing it back into the Tri-County region for new possibilities in your county. So it does have an economic development component to the program. The program certainly offers consumers a choice where they currently have no choice because our 3 primary electric utilities are in a monopoly position. They're vertically integrated, meaning they offer soup to nuts. And what we're talking about doing here is splitting those functions and the CCA taking on the electric generation and partnering, as I previously described. The program is revenue supported, as I just described, redirecting an existing revenue stream. It is not taxpayer subsidized. So I think an important point here will be that while there may be some public money, and that is unknown at this time, that's what we're working on, that would support startup capital, that startup capital is returned usually within 12 to 24 months of program launch and the start of revenues. So all of any kind of upfront investment would be returned to the provider of that capital, and then after that it's self-funding. Programs are offering stable, often less expensive electricity rates. It absolutely allows for a rapid switch to cleaner power supply, because now you're in charge of what you choose to procure to put on the grid on behalf of your customers, which equals rapid reductions in greenhouse gases. And as I mentioned, it provides a local funding source for locally tailored programs that you all might want to consider for the Tri-County region. Here's a quick snapshot of the operational CCAs. I should say that the City and County of San Francisco just launched their program in the last month. So they're not up here, but in future iterations they will be up here, and they'll have a track record soon. MCE was first to launch in 2010. They currently serve 175,000 accounts. They're in Marin County. They've just now expanded to all of Napa County, part of Contra Costa County, and then the City of Benicia in Solano County. When they're all done with their expansion, they're likely to be pushing well over 250,000 accounts. So they're on a growth trajectory right now. In the past year, in 2015 rates, they were saving customers between 2 and 5% on their electric generation. You can see here that their minimum default, the default product where everybody is enrolled, is currently at 56%. And then they have a voluntary opt-up 100% renewable option at a slight premium. And they now have a community-based solar project that's in Novato. If people choose to enroll in that has a higher premium, but it's a flat cost for a period of 20 years. So they have 3 products. And then you see Sonoma came along in 2014. They're at about 200,000 accounts. Their rate savings were more significant in the 2015 time period, at 6 to 14%. They have 2 product offerings. Their default's at 36%, and they also have the voluntary 100%. And you can look at Lancaster. Lancaster is the first program in Southern California. They are a single city that is choosing to do this on their own, just within the construct of their city, but all performing very well. And my colleague Mark Landman will be talking about some additional metrics from Sonoma in terms of renewables, but also financial performance. So here's a quick rundown of the basic program mechanics for how this works. So the first thing to understand is that under law, state law, Community Choice Energy is an opt-out program. That is actually universal across the country. So all of the 7 states have it as an opt-out program. What that means is that Monterey Bay Community Power will become your default electricity provider. Customers will be switched over on a rolling basis over a period of a couple of months and then phased in over time. And that customers always have the choice to opt out and stay with PG&E. So in that regard, it would be similar to another municipal function, such as like a water agency or garbage contract, where all the customers in your municipalities participate in that program. The key difference here is they have the option to go back and remain with PG&E bundled service if they choose. We've already talked about the fact that PG&E continues on in the traditional utility role. If the power goes out, customers still call PG&E for that service because they're taking care of the infrastructure. The electric generation charges that would be charged by Monterey Bay Community Power, including an exit fee, we call that the power charge and difference adjustment, appear as a new line item on the PG&E bill. We'll be showing you a sample bill in just a minute, so you'll see what that looks like. But all of the other charges on the bill in terms of natural gas or any kind of utility users tax, transmission and distribution, none of that gets changed. None of that's touched at all. That remains the same. Important to understand that PG&E's existing programs for care customers or low income, medical baseline, all of those remain the same. They are not touched by CCA. So they don't go away. They remain in place. The California Public Utilities Commission does have a role to play with Community Choice because we are partnering with the utility. They oversee the utility service agreement, basically how the CCA and the utility works together. And they also certify the implementation plan, and there are other requirements that the CPUC has that CCAs are responsible to. Last but not least, most Community Choice programs in the state are currently run through joint powers agencies. That is also the structure that is contemplated here in the Tri-County region. Communities can participate by passing an ordinance and passing a resolution to join the JPA and participate as part of the agency. So those are the basics. I'm happy to answer other questions at the end of the presentation. Here is Marin Clean Energy's sample energy bill. This is basically the front and the back page of the cover sheet here. And what you see here is that on that top line, it says current PG&E electric delivery charges. So none of that changes. The second line says MCE electric generation charges. So it's the generation that Monterey Bay Community Power will be dealing with. And so you would have a similar line that might say MBCP, electric generation charges. And then on the back, there will be the exit fee that is levied on all departing load customers. Important to note that that exit fee is taken into account when the Community Choice Program sets its rates, so that all in, the goal is to be underneath or at least competitive with the utilities rates, inclusive of any exit charge that may exist. So that's essentially, you still get your bill, you still pay to PG&E, and really it's the experience is no different. This is just an illustrative slide that we were able to borrow from the city of San Mateo that did their own climate action plan, and they looked at a number of different initiatives that the city could take to meet its climate action plan goals. And so everything from composting, alternative transportation, alternative fuels, energy efficiency, other renewable energy. The line across the bottom is their participation in community choice energy. And San Mateo County is planning to enroll their first customers in Peninsula Clean Energy coming up in October. So what you can see here is that by participating in just the default product, you're able to reduce your greenhouse gases on, in an order of 3 times what you're able to do through other initiatives. I would like to say that doesn't mean you shouldn't do those other things, that this is really a both-and solution that gets you there quicker and potentially at less cost to the county and the cities. Last couple slides for me here. We'll just talk about other opportunities that are available through Community Choice as a clean tech innovator, and I might add integrator, because the main focus of the program will be procuring power to put on the grid for your customers. But beyond that, there's all kinds of other cool stuff that can be done and is currently being done as examples. So far, Marin Clean Energy and Sonoma Clean Power have put over 300 megawatts of new renewable power, on the grid in the state of California. Of that, nearly 100 megawatts is local within their footprint. Local feed-in tariff and net energy metering programs are underway. So for your customers, or maybe some of you that have solar on your rooftop, you are able to participate in the program typically at rates that are more favorable than what PG&E is offering. So if you are generating excess power on your rooftop, you're going to be paid a little bit better than what PG&E currently pays. And CCE programs typically do that to incentivize the spread of distributed solar. So that is clearly a goal. There are many public and private partnerships that are options. We've already talked about the community solar project in Novato. Battery storage is of a lot of interest to folks. MCE is working out a partnership with Tesla right now to do the battery power wall for residents, and they also have a commercial battery storage at preferred terms for MCE's customers. So in that regard, the CCA acts as sort of a distribution channel and access point for other clean technologies that are available out there. EV charging stations, that's really a focus of Sonoma Clean Power, so I won't talk about that, but there's some cool stuff happening in Sonoma. Energy efficiency funding is available through the CPUC. The CCA just needs to apply for that funding, and it will get its pro rata share from the public goods charge that's already collected on our bills. So in Marin, that has yielded, I think, just under $5 million for energy efficiency program that they choose to do. That's another revenue stream. Last I'll say, there are local jobs training programs that have been initiated. MCE did a project with GridWise in the city of Richmond. Richmond is another one of their areas, and they were training low-income and underserved populations on how to install solar and do energy efficiency retrofits and all of that. So Your board of directors will have all kinds of discretion about how you choose to design your programs and what you do for local employment opportunities. My last slide is always to just talk about the fact that there are risks in any new venture that you take on. But the good news is that many of these risks have been mitigated over time. Since the new CCAs have come on board, we've dealt with a lot of the problems. Doesn't mean that they're totally gone, but they're, I would say, fairly manageable at this point. So the first is rate competition vis-a-vis market fluctuation. So rates will vary dependent on market conditions. And the key here is that your bogey is always to offer competitive rates. Because if you don't, you have the option, the customers can always opt out, and it would be a bummer to have a mass exodus of customers. What we have seen so far, in particular in Marin, because their rates were a little higher in this past year, there was very little customer attrition. And I think part of the reason for that is that there's a community value to the program that goes beyond rate savings. They're doing all of these other programs, and there's a presence in the community. So there's sort of an expanded value proposition in the community. But the other reality is that you've got to have a power portfolio that is diversified and well-crafted. And so you hire the best and the brightest, and you have terms that are different, and you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And essentially you do it quite similarly to what the utility would do for its power supply. Customer opt-outs. Competitive rates are a must here. That it seems to be that's typically the driver. Here's the good news about opt-outs. When we launched MCE back in 2010, we had an opt-out rate that was 22 and 23%. We were the first. It was new. There was a lot of public marketing against the program. That's no longer happening. That opt-out rate has dropped precipitously over time. So in Sonoma, it's under 10%. San Francisco is just enrolling its first phase. It is under 2%. So we're really seeing that as there's proof of concept and good performance, that the customer departure is really becoming more minimal. A third element to keep posted on is the availability of carbon-free supply. And that really is as the demand for carbon-free resources and, frankly, renewable resources goes up. It's just something that we're going to have to watch in terms of pricing and availability on the market, because most of the carbon-free supply that the CCA will use is going to be large hydro, not nuclear, because the utilities already have the nuclear spoken for, and many CCAs don't want to procure nuclear at any point. So we're just going to be watching the availability of large hydro, and I really think that's probably an issue for CCAs that come on much later. Because we do think that there's going to be more demand for these resources probably in the next 5 years. Last but not least, this is just an ongoing issue that you have to participate and pay attention to, and that is regulatory and legislative activity. MCE and the other CCAs are currently engaged in upwards of 30 proceedings at the Commission. And those proceedings deal with everything from cost shifting to the exit charges I referenced to rate setting. And we do that to basically make sure that the rules of the road are fair for community choice customers as we move forward. We also protect the landscape in Sacramento. We've been engaged in a number of legislative initiatives. Happy to report have been successful in all of them to date. So with that, I will, I think, stop here. I'm going to have Mark come up. He'll talk about Sonoma, and then we're happy to take any questions that you have.
Actually,
Thank you.
Let's
sir.
see if there are questions for you right now.
Sure.
Supervisor Barrio?
No, not at this time. I really would just like to continue to
Okay.
get educated on what's happening with it.
Perfect.
You bet. That's what we do.
Yeah, no.
I have a few questions, but I can wait.
You can wait? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just.
Okay.
At the end?
Yes, we'll wait.
Okay. Thank you.
And let's see here. Which one is my slide advance button? Return. Right there. Got it right there. And there you go. Perfect. At this point, we actually have to look at these things carefully and make sure we can see, so I appreciate you bearing with me. Well, good afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors. Thank you very much for inviting us to be here. It's my pleasure. My name is Mark Lamon, as was mentioned, and full disclosure, I'm here wearing a few different hats. Now, I am here as a representative of the Sonoma Clean Power Board of Directors, so I'm the outgoing chair. I'm also working as a project manager, helping lean with this project. But today, mostly, I think for our discussion, particularly a mutual self-interest we have, I'm wearing the hat of a local elected representative. I'm a city council member from the city of Cotati in Sonoma, which is the smallest city in the whole county. So it was an interesting project trying to assess the complexity of CCE, what it meant for us, what it could do, and how we could work together as a county with a lot of entities that were much larger than we were. As you can imagine, a few years ago when we went through this, we had a lot of questions. And looking back on that, I thought it would be good just to take a few slides. Let's see. And make sure we're all synced up. That's perfect. And take a look at some of the key questions that I had at the time, and I believe things that would be key questions for you. 3 key indicators. Financial performance. How does this pencil out? What do we really wind up with having to work with? What does that look like in the first couple of years? Then with that, if you have financial wherewithal, what's the track record in local investment? What sort of partnerships might be developed that are good for your community? And lastly, something very closely related to that, what results do we see in renewables? We hear a lot of talk about that, but sometimes it's long term. What can we actually accomplish in a few years as a community? So with that, let's get right to the economics, because I think that's the first question. I know it was one of the first one we had once we got past liability is, how does this pencil out? It's an important question. So using Sonoma Clean Power as an example in the first 2 years of its operation, I'm comfortable telling you that the program economics from the track record we see emerging are very strong. At the end of 2 years, their total net position now is just under $35 million. At the same time, they've paid off all startup debt. Now it mentions the startup loan of $2.5 million, but this also includes an early $1 million that they got help from with the water agency for early work in this, and then what we call a bridge loan, that first purchase of power that we have to do as an agency when we don't have income from customers yet, which was $7.5 million. That's $11 million paid off in 2 years. In addition to that, at the same time, they're slightly ahead of schedule in building reserves, because building reserves is important. You want to be prudent as a business because you have to think that way a little bit. They have a goal of $50 million within 5 years. They'll hit 30 this year, so they're getting there. At the same time, for this year, they've chosen to invest $3.5 million for efficiency programs. And I will point out this is a minimum investment because board direction to staff was very clear. If they bring back a sufficiently intriguing project, shall we say, that there's an openness to increasing that amount fairly substantially, maybe to not quite double. And along with that this year, there were also some small, but nevertheless across-the-board reductions in customer electrical rates. And why? Because, as mentioned earlier, you want to be competitive. You want to keep customers motivated. And it's that balance of offering good renewable programs and investing in a better environment, but also offering a better service for your customers. These two marry together perfectly. I want to mention before we move away from this, these sort of results are not unique to Sonoma Clean Power. We see the same sort of indicators over at MCE. They're going to finish this year with a net position of about $25 million, I believe. They're not asking for a rate increase in 16-17, and that's not usually something you see from power companies. I know my many years from PG&E, I sure never saw that. They also offer, interestingly enough, in their entry-level program, they offer one of the highest amount of renewables in their basic product, 56%. As a board member from Sonoma Clean Power, I will have admit to some mild envy for that. And lastly, Lancaster Choice Energy was mentioned briefly. They are brand new. They're smaller than all of us. They're a singular city doing this. And yet in their first year, they were able to deliver on their promise of delivering cleaner power at lower rates. So that gives you a sense of what we have to work with. Now the question is, what can we do with it? What are the sorts of things we'll see? Well, local value through local partnerships. One of the first things you'd expect would be a net energy metering program. And for members of the audience who might not be familiar with this term, what it really means, it's a way for customers that might have solar on their roof, or particularly customers who are thinking of building solar on their roof, to be able to spin that meter backwards when they generate more power than they consume. And what's different from the way a CCE can do it, like Sonoma Clean Power and potentially Monterey Bay Community Energy, is we can actually offer inducements to spread that build-out of solar power. We can make it a better deal for our customers. to help increase that solar build-out. And that's exactly what we've attempted to do in Sonoma County. Now, our first year of this, we didn't have a full year, but we found when we sent our checks back out to people that overproduced, we sent out over 200,000 back. And we had a lot of happy community members because they were not used to receiving checks being paid at retail rate for their generation. They were used to being paid at wholesale. And school districts in particular, who I think were roughly a quarter to a third of our recipients, really appreciative of that. Now, this year we have our first full year, and we have some more people doing this now. We're finding we did over 690,000, almost 700,000 in 1 year back into our community for about 1,400 customers. That's almost 700,000 that stays pretty much in our county. And I think that's something that's always on our mind. When money goes out, does it go out of our county or does it stay in there? And that's always on our mind with this sort of thing. So going from a basic entry-level thing that you'd expect to see, let's talk about some of the surprise things that come up, partnerships that you'll have with local resources that are unique to every single county. One that we've worked on is something called photovoltaics. Fun name, but it's kind of an interesting thing because what it is an example of turning a problem into a solution. One of our partners, the Sonoma County Water Agency, had a problem, and the problem was they have about 6 ponds, wastewater ponds, they're very large. They had to spend a lot of money in chemicals to keep algae growth down. Clearly, this is a place where a shade structure would have been very, very valuable. But because, as they were looking at this, they knew they had a CCE in their county interested in partnering in programs, they said, well, wait a minute. If we're going to build shade, why don't we put solar arrays over this? We'll still get our shade, but long term, we'll generate cleaner power, which is good. We're behind that. But we also will probably be ahead down the road money-wise on this, too. And that's exactly what we're doing. What we're building in our county will be the largest floating solar array in the country. Second largest in the world. We missed being number one by about that much. But it should, when completed, and if engineering validates, generate 12.5 megawatts from those 6 ponds. That's enough for about 3,000 homes. Now, clearly, there should be local jobs for installation, certainly some maintenance down the road. But what's interesting about this to me, and I hope to you and the audience as well, is this is expandable. Once we do the work as working as partners for this new thing and figuring it out and making sure that it holds up in practice, we can share this with our ag industry. They have a lot of use for this. Our wine industry, we know they can use it. And even some of our municipal partners have wastewater ponds where they could do this. And once we do this in Sonoma County and iron it out really good so we're ready to share it with our friends, there's no reason the rest of the state can't share this. And that brings me to a real interesting point, is that CCE, Community Choice Energy, potentiates innovation. If you think all of us, individually, in our own locations, our own communities, working on unique problems we have and finding out good ways to solve them, we can bring them back and share that. And what happens is I think we'll see an exponential growth in new solutions for the problems we all face. So that's an example of that. I'll talk for just a minute on EV technology. And people often ask me when I mention this is an interest of Sonoma Clean Power, why EVs? Now, clearly, you sell electricity. They use electricity. We see a little nexus there. But there's more than that. We had a very compelling chart here that showed the huge benefit that switching to a cleaner power mix happens. Your first year as a CCE, your county will realize the largest greenhouse gas reduction you have ever seen. It will be very, very significant. But then, as you say, this is great. What's the next step? How can we do a little better with this? You'll find that power mix can't help you much more because most of it then comes from the transportation sector. In Sonoma County, this is about 65% of the emissions for us. It's a little higher. So this is why we're looking at it. We sell electricity, this makes sense, and we can do another dramatic reduction in GHG emissions with this. And that's a core thing for us to deal with. So we're looking at it in a couple of interesting ways. Certainly some basic entry-level stuff that I think everyone would expect, but then a few things down the road that might be a little more interesting. First of all, there's no reason we can't invest in infrastructure once we get big enough. We're getting to the point where we can do that now in a few years. And if we build more charging stations, that reduces range anxiety, may help increase adoption, because our goal is to triple the number of EVs in our county by 2020. We want to get up to 10,000 of them. Fairly audacious goal, but we like that. To the next step, as we get big enough, there's no reason we can't offer inducements, just like we do with other things. there's no reason we can't offer inducements, like with Net Green, inducements to make this better for customers. We could look at leasing assists. We could look at group purchases. That's certainly a logical thing to spend some time on. But then as we go a few years down the road, here's where the fun stuff starts. This is where the exciting things happen with CCE. If we have a county that has a really large amount of EVs connected, ideally through a smart charging system, what can we do about demand reduction with that? Think of it, about 3 o'clock on summer when all of a sudden that demand hits the electrical system, the grid, and we have a choice of, do we fire up a expensive, dirty, peaking power plant? Or can we actually control demand reduction by maybe ever so slightly metering down charging within a narrow bandwidth that's been pre-agreed with, perhaps contractually, in support for monetary reductions? Interesting thought. With that, saves a lot of money. There's nothing better than reducing demand. That's the best clean power you can ever buy. Next step beyond that, think about this system again. All those cars connected. How many batteries are there? How much storage is there? That's another potential down the line, potentially even bidirectionally, to be used in some way. So just thoughts about, these are the type of things, from very basic to rather down the road exciting things that you can get involved with us, have some control over, and help find benefit for your counties. So let's finally talk about renewables. Again, just like we did with the feed-in tariff, one of the first things you expect, with net energy metering, one of the first programs we operated was a feed-in tariff program. Ours is called Profit. It can also be pronounced Profit. As long as the customers are happy, I don't care terribly much about the name. But what this is essentially a next step up past energy metering. These are local, small-scale, renewable energy contracts with individuals and businesses. They're 10 to 20-year contracts for renewable portfolio standard compliant energy. They could be as a shade structure in a car lot. They could be on top of a building, on top of a parking structure, on top of a warehouse. And again, because we're a CCE, we can offer inducements to make this better and help drive that building in our community. We offer what we call bonus criteria. If you're doing a small system, less than 250 kilowatts, we'll give you a break price there. If you have a previously developed site, a blighted area, we like that. Well, because we don't want to use prime ag land. I think that's another thing we probably share. We don't want our ag land used for that. Our consumers and our electorate certainly don't want that. So we'll definitely pay for that. We even go so far as to offer the potential for training incentive for contractors if they use local apprentices for a certain amount of the project. So these are the type of things you can do. In our first year, we were able to get 3 megawatts, 3 separate contracts started. That's enough for maybe 20% of a small city's needs, so it's a good start. Getting to something a little bigger and not quite as local is the Mustang project. This is a large solar project in Central California, and part of it was constructed due to the investment of Sonoma Clean Power. And I make that point that as a CCE, you'll actually be able not just to buy power, but actually drive the construction of power. You'll send the market signals for what's going to be developed out there. Will it be clean power or not? And this is a new thing. With that, we will have from this 70 megawatts of clean California solar for the next 20 years. So I mentioned the Mustang project, not just because it's relatively local to us in our state, and because it's good solar power and we got a good rate on it, but another question we get, what as a CCE can you do for jobs? What good jobs can you bring to the community? Or what role is there for labor? We get that question too. And this project came to us with a project labor agreement, as well as a very good price. And perhaps, unsurprisingly, it was completed early and is going to be online early. So those are the sorts of things, if you have interest in those directions, there's ways to go down that path. And lastly, everybody looks locally for what works for them for local power. Some places it's biogas, some places it's wind. Some areas have a lot of potential for solar. For us, we're fortunate we have some geothermal because we're impacted with a lot of ag. It's hard for us to find places for big, typical solar construction. And geothermal is great because this power, although it's a little pricey, it is constant, 24/7, same output. And this marries really nicely with our wind and solar because, as you know, they peak and they change. But the other benefit for us is we use this to source our 100% evergreen product. As Sean mentioned, most CCEs offer an entry-level product, which is competitive price-wise with PG&E or your investor-owned utility. And then they offer, for those who want it, who want to pay a few dollars extra a month, a 100% renewable product. We do that. It's called Evergreen, but we wanted it also to have it support local renewable power, not renewable power just bought in the market. So that's how we use it, and it's worked out well for us. And again, as before, these sorts of results in making that switch to renewables aren't limited just to us. MCE has, to my mind, a rather huge contract for 177 megawatts of wind from Kern County to help with their astounding success and their rapid growth to support that, as well as, as Sean mentioned, 10.5 megawatt solar project in Richmond, and even 1.5 megawatt small local one in my old hometown of Novato. So, in Lancaster Choice Energy, the small new municipal we mentioned, they're already partnering in that first year to build a 10 megawatt local solar, which is very respectable. And they have, like so many of us, they have a bold, audacious goal they want to do, a big, audacious goal that they're really looking for. They want to be a net zero city. And they believe they can get there, and they probably will. They want to generate all their own power locally, renewably, and sell the excess. So, some final points. Since Sonoma Clean Power's launch in 2014, the customers in our community have saved cumulatively over $50 million. This comes from joint rate comparisons that are co-produced with PG&E every year. And I will point out that $50 million, that's money that stays largely in our community. Even if the aggregate saving on the individual bill isn't much, the total amount is something very worthwhile. In just their first year of operation, Sonoma Clean Power reduced greenhouse emissions well over 40% compared with PG&E's power mix in their last data that we had from 2013. Now, just the contracts that I've mentioned today, talking with you, the ones from our first couple of years of operation, are enough to realize 135 megawatts of local and California renewables every year for decades to come. So I think the results are in. The economics of CCE will work. CCE can increase local investment. You can use it to reduce financial bleed, and you can do that in a way that benefits uniquely your community. You'll be the decider of that. And lastly, CCE can greatly, and I will underline that greatly, increase the speed of that switch to renewables. So if nothing else, I hope left you with the thought today that CCE is a very powerful tool that you can use to your advantage as it benefits your community. And personally, I'm looking forward to see what Monterey Bay Community Power can do working with it. So thank you very much. I believe we're going to be available for questions. You may want to do that now or later. We will be here at your call.
What's the pleasure of the board?
We might as well ask a few questions right now, I would think.
Okay. Supervisor Botello?
Oh, okay. I find this really, really interesting. And the agencies that are involved in these co-ops, I'll call it that. What type of ground do they put this on? You mentioned the wastewater ponds and then the geothermal sources. Mm-hmm. But in my own mind, we got a landfill which we're just burning the methane gas now, and there's probably areas that would be suitable for solar panels. Is that the type of contribution into the system, the PG&E grid, that agencies do?
I think that's exactly, I think to your point, yes, to be brief, and then I'll expand a little bit on that. If you take a look at the type of areas, Supervisor, that we were looking at, we try to find blighted areas because we share having prime ag land that we don't want to use. These wastewater ponds are on the property of the Sonoma County Water Agency, and they're out of sight. They're not particularly handsome. They're not good for much other use at this point. They're good locations for this. Similarly, when you mention about having excess methane from your waste facility and burning it off, depending on how much you have and for how long, there's a perfect example. And that's a perfect place, too, to site solar. That's not going to be problematic for the community, and depending if it has the right exposure and what sort of project you can put together, that's a potential that might fit well in your community.
Yeah, and, I guess everybody is under the same set of rules with their MPOs. metropolitan organizations as far as greenhouse gas reductions. And, sitting on AMBAG a couple of years ago, and I was Supervisor Munzer is on that, and we set goals for our area. And I could see where this is really a tangible way to accomplish those goals and probably exceed them. I always had a hard time figuring out how does a region that is growing economically and population is able to reduce greenhouse gases. To me, it just didn't fit. But
what I can tell you is that Marin County was able to achieve its climate action plan goals 5 years ahead of schedule, and Marin Clean Energy is exceeding all of its initial projections for greenhouse gas reductions, and I believe Sonoma's doing the same. So greenhouse gas reduction is probably the number one driver of why communities are interested in this program.
And talking about, growth, do these, different cities and counties, are they integrating maybe, what would you call it, participation with new development into these programs, or as far as part of the mitigations on greenhouse gas emissions?
So far, we haven't seen the integration of building codes, if you will, or requirements for inclusion of solar on a new development rooftop. That is typically handled at the municipal, individual city or county level as opposed to a CCA policy. But it could be a partnership that is created with the Community Choice Program to be the off-taker of some of that power. I think one of the important things to remember is that at least in the first probably 5 years, Kirby might be able to comment on this, of the program, the Community Choice Energy program is really about power purchase agreements and being the off-taker, contracting for that power, as opposed to building anything. So typically what we're seeing is that there's a partnership with a private developer, solar, wind, whatever it's going to be. They develop the project, they take it through the EIR, the CEQA, all that stuff that's required. They take the investment tax credit for the first X years, and then either the CCA can either buy that project out at fair market value or just continue to contract for that power. But it's important to note that it's really a public-private partnership in that regard.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to hear. And the other part of that partnership, PG&E, do they have any sort of reservations, or are they reluctant partners in this, or are they enthusiastic partners?
While my partner is chuckling and thinking about what to say, I would just say this. I think if we look in business partnerships, sometimes they're harmonious, sometimes there's some tension. I think that's a natural part of any business. But the truth of the matter is we share common goals on programs where we can work together. I can speak for RCC, and I'm sure MCE too. We look to work with PG&E, and there's no reason. Why should we reinvent something if they're doing it well? Long term, there may be some areas we'll disagree on, and there'll be some back and forth, just like there is in any business partnership. But in essence, we work together because we have to deliver service to the community.
Right, and because that's an area that I'm somewhat little concerned about, because we're at the bottom of the grid, and we have to kind of twist our arms to put up additional substations just to service our needs, and that's always been kind of a battle with PG&E here. But
I'd like to be able to tell you that CC will help with that, but that might be one area where things won't change largely. But what I can tell you, it may help a little bit. You're not alone. We all have that same relationship with them. So,
all right, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Barrios.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Since PG&E maintains control of the grid, do they charge us initially to connect to the grid, and then that's it? But certainly they have maintenance costs, and I mean that's subject to increase. So how is there that? Oh, I thought it was on.
It is on.
Well, maybe I need to just get this closer.
There we go.
So how is that controlled? And do we pay an initial connection fee, and then that's it?
Yep. So all of that is accounted for in the transmission and distribution charges of your bill. So that does not change with respect to the generation side. So it's set up so that those two functions really are even already separate within the utility. The CCA does pay a utility service deposit that's fairly modest. The CCA also does post a bond in the eventual return of customers. That we don't anticipate that happening, but in the event that customers had to be returned to the utility, that $100,000 bond would be retired and those customers would be returned.
Okay, so that is a separate part. The maintenance, then, you're saying, is a separate part
Yes,
in the
and
bill.
you already pay for that
We already
as a
paid
customer.
For that.
Yes.
Okay. And then another question. Well, you answered it actually earlier. How do you guarantee local jobs? We obviously we approved a solar farm here, and there was a lot of, you do a lot of negotiating through a development agreement. So is this basically the way you would do it to guarantee local jobs? If you contract with a contractor that is perhaps from San Jose, how does that guarantee us local jobs?
I can take a pass at that you like,
Sure.
and then fill in anything you see. Well, first of all, this is one of the benefits of CEC and being involved early on in the process, because you have a voice in how that works. And the key benefit is, instead of that extra money that is earned going back to stockholders, you have to work with it, and you decide where is the best place to invest it. Is it keeping rates down? Is it perhaps supporting some slightly more expensive but better power in your local community that might fund some jobs? So you get to make that decision, and you have that rare thing as an elected official to say, I have two bids here, this one's a little bit more, but I think this benefits my community more, and because that's our charge as a CCE, I can fully justify investing that money there. So to answer your question, it's largely your decision. Sometimes it's difficult as we get into making sure something's local. If you're working with business providers, they may have an office in your community or county. Workers might be local to your city, but then perhaps the home office is out of state. There's a lot of variability there. It takes some staff time to truly get that down to where you want. But I think it gets back to the point you made about local partnerships. As you work with partners, that's where you decide really to get your local investment. And as I said, you'll be the judge of that. Putting in jobs, to my mind, is always a good investment.
I'd say the same. It's really up to your board of directors to negotiate the terms of those agreements that you have.
So we would have to have a separate, some sort of a development, like we do development agreements, and to guarantee
Not so far, but really that's going to be at the regional board. Right. That's going to be at the CCA board level to determine what those policies are and how they want to negotiate and what they want to require in those contracts.
Okay. And then the last thing is that obviously this is not going to control gas costs. And so that is subject to higher rates. I mean, maybe PG&E will want to make up. And as a disclaimer, my son works for PG&E on the gas side. But how are people going to, now that the electrical will be cheaper, or do you see a movement of moving from gas heaters, gas stoves, gas dryers, to electric, so that because the savings is bigger? And it guarantees a lid, pretty much.
Well, I think long-term, yes. At this point, not just yet. Clearly, there's a driver in that if we want to move towards cleaner power, and we can generate clean power electricity cleanly, then down the road, all of a sudden, things that perhaps, most of us think of electricity for heating. We go, oh, that's not efficient. We don't want to do that. Although nowadays, there are some engineering options that actually are efficient, but they're very expensive up front. It's a long-term investment to get your payout on that. So I think this points that down the road this happens, and that's regardless of CCE, although we help make that happen. But at this point, I think it will continue to be business more like usual when it comes at least to the gas side of things for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
And I have one last question. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Okay, the initial investment, you generate, you get a grant, or you do a private-public partnership to get your initial investment. To once you choose where your resources are, whether it be hydro or wind or sun, whatever, solar, then you have a savings to the customer. Where do you generate the money to reinvest? If you decide you want to build how do you generate that? I mean, I don't have a clear picture of that yet.
Right. So I want to just be clear that the startup capital that Supervisor McPherson was referencing came from the state as well as some private money. That is not the whole amount of money that's going to be needed. And so one of the things you'll hear about from Carol is that there's going to be a subcommittee on financing. So there will be some additional startup capital that's required that will be repaid back through the revenues of the agency. And so that's the same answer as to how do you generate that excess capital. So when you have gone into contract, you know what your renewable portfolio is going to be, what you want to do to balance out your greenhouse gases versus what your rate goals are. Then you will design a rate structure around that that also builds in enough capital to cover your costs. Plus,
so you'll split that savings between the consumer and
your reserve account.
And the reserve account.
Your reserve account plus whatever there might be some excess to. Typically, you leverage it up with other sources of capital because that's, then you just are leveraging your ability to do stuff. But the board will have full discretion over how it allocates its funding.
Okay, so then all the funding will be generated from those savings, essentially.
Through ratepayer revenues.
Yes,
through
exactly.
revenues.
And nothing,
That's
there
right.
should be nothing from a
and
general
the board
fund.
of directors of that JPA has the discretion over the assets and liabilities of the agency.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I have 4 or 5 questions here. First of all, I want to say I serve on the AMBAG board, as Supervisor Patel mentioned. I also serve on the Monterey Bay Air Resource Board. So I've heard the presentation from Supervisor McPherson 2 or 3 times, and I've sat down with them and talked basically one-on-one. I'm excited about this program, but I guess I want to stress that the ratepayer, it's always voluntary for them to become part of this, correct?
No, the ratepayers are automatically enrolled because the program is an opt-out program. The ratepayers are automatically enrolled. If they so choose to opt out, they may opt out and return to the bundled service.
Okay, that's a little bit
PG&E.
different than what I've been hearing up to this
sorry.
point.
Yeah,
so they are. So if we decide as a board to have San Benito County participate, all the residents of the non-incorporated area will be automatically enrolled in the program.
At designated time frames, and there's a whole requirement around notification and opt-out, and there's a whole process that goes with that. But yes, they are affirmatively enrolled.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Then, like I said, I was under the impression that we had to go out and sell it to them and
No.
get them to buy into it. So that then all right. Then the other thing that has come up, and I actually was expecting some of the member of the realtor community here, but I don't know if you're familiar with the Hero and PACE programs
Yes.
and the issues that are arising with those programs because the loans are placed on the property tax rolls and they become basically a super loan, which takes precedence over any other loan to the point that Freddie Mac and all the federal governments won't touch a property that has those loans on them. So there is nothing similar to the PACE/Hero program loans.
They can work
in this
together
program.
if you choose to have them, but it sounds like maybe you don't, and they're totally different.
Okay,
functions.
I just want to make that
Yeah.
absolutely clear that it's nothing similar to those programs.
No.
Okay, and then you might.
Supervisor Munzer, hold on. I want to ask a question to that question.
Okay.
And then can I?
Sure.
Thank you. Because actually that was going to be one of my questions too, so I might as well ask it because it's hot right now on the table. So you got the home and you got the PACE and the Hero program, and the way they work is basically put it on correct the way Supervisor Munzer. How is it that you're going to put how are you going to put solar panels on my rooftop? Explain to me from the financing perspective.
We're not. We will a CCA program will not do anything unless you voluntarily choose to do that. So if you're a residential customer or a business and you want to put solar on your rooftop, You would do that through whatever solar company you choose to work with.
Okay.
And then the CCA program will pay you for any excess
you
generation.
come from a supply perspective.
Absolutely right.
Thank you. Supervisor,
Correct.
continue.
Okay, thank you. So you touched on the rooftop solar that you normally the organization would buy back the SS power at usually a higher rate. And sometimes I think I know how some of this stuff works, and I find out I don't, as in
I know
the
just
up
how
in
you
and
feel.
out
Yeah, you're not alone.
But my understanding is when someone comes in, they rent the solar panels from Company X. They're promised their rate will stay the same for the next 20 or 30 years or whatever. How are they going to interact with all this?
Nothing changes. So that would be a lease agreement. You can either own your installation or you can lease it. You're talking about a lease agreement.
Right,
The
right.
lease arrangement remains the same. The difference is that if you're generating excess power and you're selling it back to the CCE, it pays you at CCE's rate, at those rates, not PG&E's rates. So the deal that you've cut with your solar, your leasing provider to pay you for the size of the install and what you need, that all remains in place.
Okay.
It's not interrupted.
Okay, all right. And then let's see. And then you talked about an exit charge. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Oh, it's so much fun. Kirby will probably do a better job, but here's the bottom line. It is an exit fee that is charged by the utility, and it's authorized by the CPUC every year to basically keep the utility whole. It essentially transfers the costs of stranded assets or stranded power contracts that they entered into on a customer's behalf.
Oh, okay.
So if you have departing load, there's an exit fee that's assessed, it changes every year, that the customer has to pay in order to keep the utility
Okay.
whole. That's what it's for.
Okay, thank you. And then, and this is probably more of a comment than a question, and I know that the makeup of the JPA board has not been established yet.
Correct.
But I just want to make the comment of, because San Mateo County and its cities are kind of the small potato in this deal, I want to make sure it's understood that we would be looking for, not only for the county, but for our two cities, to be having voting members in the makeup of that JPA board. And it doesn't always happen that way, but I think I want to stress that we are looking to be voting members of that board. So just, it's more of a comment than a...
And I think that's fine, and I think what we would do is invite you, and Carol will be inviting you to participate in the governance subcommittee that will work together over the summer in July to recommend some of those
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
outcomes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That was the experience I had. Somewhat similar as a small community working with much larger ones who sometimes have competing interests. And this is why I tell people you have two options. You can drag your feet and wait. And sometimes that's prudent to be careful. But at the same time, if you want a hand in decision making and you have a path you want to see happen, my experience, it's best to be there early and be at the table and push for what you want, and we'll see where we get to. Because this is going to be a partnership. Everybody who's part of this, it is a working partnership, and you have to find something that works for this region. So I would encourage you, as she said, Carol will be in contact, and I'll be actually part of that governance subcommittee, so I would like to see a lot of voices there and a lot of good questions, just like we've had today.
Well, here's my set of questions.
Oh, wow, okay.
This is the most action
It's
we've
about
had. You guys are great.
It's about 15
I know,
questions,
this is
so
good.
bear with me. And I want the board to bear with me, please. You just mentioned earlier that it was unincorporated only. So I assume you're going to go back to the city of San Juan and City Hall to ask them for resolutions too, correct?
Yes, they will have the same opportunity.
And now, what Supervisor Barrio said earlier about it's an option. I'm sorry, Super Munzer said about it's an option out. I too am a little concerned about that. In fact, I don't even agree with it. I'll be honest with you.
Fair enough.
You might actually get a no vote from me on this one. But let's continue. You never know. We can move forward and progress in some way. I just thinking about this, and you already answered the HERO and the PACE program, so I'll cross that out. I'm a little concerned because I'm trying to listen to I'm hearing the conversation of what you're saying, and I'm also thinking about the project we had just approved, the PV2 project that's providing solar power. The county is getting X amount of dollars in return for that project that we approved. And for me, whenever you get into a partnership, I'm always a little concerned. I always step back and say, well, wait a minute. Why am I getting a partnership? Because before we have this much position, this much value. Now we're in a partner and we're small compared to the other partners. We want to make sure that the county either gets a lot of rate of return. It's just, bottom line is, what we got to offer for you guys are two things: customers and land. That's the way I look at it. And so for the community, that land is precious and it holds a lot of value. And sometimes I think to myself, wait a minute, I don't need you guys. We can do this ourselves. The only thing we probably need is the financing. That's really what I look at it. Listening to you guys and seeing you guys are making cuckoo bucks off the ratepayers and using our land, I'm concerned. That just brings a red flag for me. So I still got to do more research and more information and talk to other counties or other agencies and see if it's a win-win. Even talk to a solar energy and alternative energy private community, because I've actually been dealing from a private business, because we have a recycling business and we're in about 2 or 3 programs that we have change of operations so that demand doesn't hit us a big PG&E. We operate away from 2 to 6 o'clock to make sure that we don't pay that high rate for PG&E. So I'm very familiar with some of those mechanisms and process, how it works. One of the questions I have right now is, you might have explained the rates, how they work, but if there's a target number that the organization you guys want to get, that's included in what you're going to charge the homeowners, right? If it costs someone, let's say, for example, $10 a unit, and in that $10 a unit, or 10 cents a unit in the case, you take in consideration paying back the debt, retiring debt, the liabilities, and then a profit for the organizations, to have a sink fund, to have an investment, or to pay for other projects, because you're basically almost like PG&E. And you said it perfectly, right? It's PG&E makes a lot of money. What we're doing is we're not making as much money, but we are going to make money. So is the county going to get money off of that?
No, to answer your question. So I want to, such great comments, because I want to see if I can touch on all of them. Important thing to understand is that at least so far, what we've seen with the JPA organizations, where it's a multi-jurisdictional organization, the assets and the liabilities of that Joint Powers Agency remain with the Joint Powers Agency. So that's the good news and potentially the bad news, depending on how you look at it. The good news is that there's a protective legal firewall between the assets and the liabilities of the JPA, so it can never come back and hit your general fund. It really protects the member agencies. But there is no franchise fee. And kind of what you're alluding to is a franchise fee.
Yes.
So far, there's no franchise fee that's been paid out. It really remains in the program. But here's another point I want to make. The Monterey Bay Community Power is not a for-profit entity. It's a non-profit public agency. I hear what you're saying. And so when you go into rate design and you set your budget, and Kirby might be able to comment on this, and then we'll stop because he's got a lot more to tell you. But you basically design your rates to cover your expenses, to cover your debt service, to achieve your renewable and greenhouse gas reduction goals, to hopefully lower costs for consumers, and then you have to have enough left over for typically 4 to 5% to go into reserves, because you want to have a rate stabilization and all that.
Right.
And then you've got X number of dollars left over to leverage up. Now, let's make a comment. Sonoma Clean Power has made a policy decision to front load the really kind of getting up to that $50 million reserve level. There might be many reasons, but one of them is to get a credit rating and to be able to stand on its own.
Right, so you can get by the dollar cheaper.
That's
totally
right.
Understand
but the CCA itself is not the developer. So I want to your point about we have land. That's awesome. But it's a both-and proposition. So there's nothing about what the CCA would do that would usurp a local government's control over the way it uses its land. So you can still do your own deals if that's what you choose to do, and the CCA could be the off-taker of that power, the counterparty of that power, and that's why so far we've seen independent power producers really like this program, because it's a new buyer in town. They're able to have contractual arrangements with another entity besides the utility with all of the terms that they require. So it's diversifying the marketplace.
No, I appreciate it. And I've been in office, actually, Supervisor Patel and I have been in office for 12 years, going on 12 years. And I don't even know what the record is, but I can tell you, you sound like another utility, and that is the landfill, John Smith landfill. Every year they come to us and say, we got these expenses, we got these rates, and we got to sustain this, and all we're asking for is COLA adjustments and rate increase and government regulations and state rules that to allow us approve this increase to the pay raters, that ones who put the garbage out there. Every year we have it, and every year or every other year I vote no, because it's a guaranteed business. Who wouldn't want to invest dollars knowing there's a great guaranteed rate of return for every dollar you put in?
Yeah, there's no guaranteed rate of return for this. There is for PG&E, however, so that
I
might
with
be
you.
worth
I agree.
noting.
I wonder if I might take a swing at just a couple of your questions.
Sure.
And first of all, I want to thank you. This is some of the best
Yeah, good question.
engagement we've had. And, you hit on a key question that was a huge problem for many of us in Sonoma. And still, it's not, sometimes we come to decisions, there's a perfect choice and there's a bad choice. That's rare. More often it's like, this choice is better, but it's still not perfect. This one, it's worse, even though it has its things to be said for it. And I'm talking specifically about the opt-out construction of CCEs. And that's just not here and not what we're pushing. It's countrywide. There's a reason for it. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, as you said, it would be ideal to go individually, door to door, talk to people and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're proposing. If enough people join, we can save this much, which you could then get lower rates and or both get cheaper power in your community. But if you think about that for a moment in practice, to get up to the point of having enough customers, to have enough guaranteed income to actually go live and do that, it would take you years. You would never be able to get enough people to agree at the same time to actually go live as a CCE. And that's why legally this was put together this way. So not ideal, but there's a reason for it. It's not just siphoning customers away for no reason. And I wanted to point out one other aspect that...
Hold on a minute, sir.
Certainly.
I'm coming from the perspective that and former Supervisor Red Bonaco always used to say that the state of California is always our enemy. It's not really our friend. And that's because every time the state does regulations, we, the Board of Supervisors, a constituent can sit right there 10 feet away from us and yell at us. They can't do that to the assembly members of the state of California, senators. They can't do that.
You should be at some of my council meetings.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
There's a reason my hair is this color.
So at the end of the day, the homeowners can't yell at PG&E because they're such a giant. But I can guarantee you they can call their supervisor and yell at them if it's something that we approve through a resolution.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the benefit of it. This is why it's not for us, but you know what? This is our job. We do it. As I mentioned, that's why I look like this. But you know what? I like the idea that if people have questions about how we're investing in our community, what we're putting into keeping rates down for them, what we're putting in for the other half of the coin, good projects locally for renewable energy, they can see me walking my dog in the neighborhood and get my ear and get 15 minutes easy with me. They can see me at the store shopping. They can call me on the phone. I'll pick up. A little busier for you, I'm sure, than me, but still it's the same thing. And although it's more work for us, that's the part about local control that brings the value. And just to go back to the opt-out thing, the one other benefit I want to point, at least with this, there's an option. Always the default service has been PG&E, for example, in my area, because there was nobody else. So naturally they're default. But the way the law works is once somebody locally, whether it's your county or a group of counties or your city, starts offering this service, you're the local provider, therefore you're the default. So there's an advantage because now, even though it's not the ideal way, perhaps in all of our minds, of doing it, we have a road to giving people a choice between two different providers, something they never had before. And let's see. I think we've taken a fair amount of time, but I wanted to thank you for asking that question. I appreciate you letting me go on.
House, we're going to wind down you with that.
Good.
We have more speakers. Okay.
They're going to wait. We got. Oh shoot! Oh, here it goes. If we were to join the GPA, because we're a small county, is the votes going to be based on weighted, or is it going to be based on a fair distribution of voting power?
Yeah, go ahead.
This
Determined.
This is to be determined, and it's up to you if you want to have a voice in that. Very quickly in my county, I had the same concern as a mayor. Where we wound up is we found us up something that balanced those two concerns. We allow the big cities who are concerned about being pushed around by the tyranny of the minority, because we get more votes. We allow them their weighted vote. Fair enough. They have more power if they use that. But they still need us to vote in the numerical majority too. Now, at first glance, you say, what does that mean? It means you can never do anything. But what it means is I don't go forward with any idea or any project or any discussion that I can't make work for all of the members of our board. We have to set that big city, small city, county, municipal thing aside because we know we can block each other anytime we want. And because of that, we work together. And in 2 years, we've never called for a weighted vote. So that is up to you to determine. There's a lot of ways to do it, but it's a key point, and that's something you get a voice in.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate your comments and your response. It's a huge investment. This is the way I look at it. I just envision it 20 years if it goes in the wrong way. You're going to have 40 solar panels in our backyard and nothing in Monterey and other places. Just a wacko, crazy thought. That's all. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, Carol.
Thank you. So at this time, I'd also like to say that there's a lot of information that's being covered, and we do have a website that has an enormous amount of information, including what you've seen today on the technical study that Kirby's going to be talking about, the goals and recommendations of the PDAC, and that website is mbcommunitypower.org. So if you want to make a note of that, go there. If you have any outstanding questions after we're done here today, feel free to visit that website. Also, if you'd like to request a meeting with Supervisor McPherson and his assistant, Jenny Johnson, to do a one-on-one, face-to-face, she's happy to schedule that and come and do a follow-up meeting and answer some more questions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Richard Stedman, who's Vice Chair of the PDAC Commission. That commission has been involved for the last 3 years to getting us to where we are today. He's also, since 2009, the Air Pollution Control Officer for the Monterey Bay Air Resource District.
Okay. Thanks, Carol. Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. You guys are tough audience here. I only wished you had been engaged a little bit earlier because some of the questions you're asking are some of the questions I asked going into this. And you may say, what's an air quality professional doing up here? Yes, that's it. Thank you. Not only do we see reductions in greenhouse gases as getting away from the combustion economy, we can also see reductions in co-benefits and reducing other pollutants. So anytime you burn, whether it's anything containing a hydrocarbon, you're going to produce carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, but you're also going to produce particulates, PAHs, polyaromatic or cyclic hydrocarbons. You're going to be producing toxics. So when you reduce CO2, you're also going to be reducing some of these other things, which will improve the health and the environment. So I'm here today to talk about the Project Development Advisory Committee. And we're one of the first steps in investigating whether or not it's going to be feasible to set up a JPA or a CCE within this region. And so you'll see that all the arrows pointing that it's probably going to go, but we went in with full skepticism, and we kept on telling ourselves not until we've seen the final feasibility report are we going to make a decision, even though we saw a lot of flags along the way that's sort of giving us the green light. So to advance here, I just need to, can I push space? Yeah. So I need to talk about just a little bit about our partners. Now it says all Monterey Bay regional local governments, and that's exactly what it is. It's not those all that participated, it's all the regional local governments in our three-county region. And then I also would be remiss if I didn't talk about our key private partner, and that's the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County. And as you heard from Supervisor McPherson, I just want to also emphasize that We never had to dip into anybody's general fund to supply monies for this project. We raised over $400,000 to address some of the issues that we came up with and to conduct the technical study. So just want to set up what the Regional Project Development Advisory Committee did and some of the findings in the end. By way of background, we were formed, so this is a while ago, in 2013 with 15 members representing our county and city governments and partners. The PDAC hosted 26 public meetings and spent more than 100 hours learning about and analyzing all the technical issues that came about with respect to forming a community choice energy program. So the core of the PDAC's investigation was to scope and supervise and the completion of the technical study. So, but we did so much more. The committee also saw the need to gather additional resource materials other than the technical study to assist our jurisdictional partners in their decision-making progress. So the end result, after nearly 3 years of work, is the PDAC voted unanimously to approve several findings and recommendations. So you can see this feasibility finding here is that it's going to be highly feasible with a wide variety of options to start a CCE in the Monterey Bay County, three-county region. And so all the, as I said, the flags were pointing towards that it was going to be feasible, but we kept on the straight and narrow to make sure we saw that in the black and white. Certainly with the success of Marin Clean Energy and Sonoma Clean Power, we saw them sort of pave the way, and we saw their experience and their success. So we learned a lot from that to begin with. We've also, as Kirby will tell you, we're in a favorable energy market right now, which can change, but power right now is at a really low cost. And then we also sort of folded in the climate action plan objectives that other local entities had. So, but I should say this is dynamic and improving, and we'll see there's probably going to be more CCEs coming on board. So there'll be more competition, but that may spur us to have better renewable projects in the future as well. So in addition to participating in a study session like today, you can also request any other member or in the public out there another presentation from our governing board. And also we can also send out a representative from PDAC to discuss governance, finance, and formation, and so forth. And that's going to be coming up. We've sort of framed some of these issues for further discussion. But I did want to talk about some of the deadlines coming up. And the PDAC recommends that the CCE JPA form by October 31st for several important reasons. And that's because it's one of the best windows to provide power to customers. Has been proven to be between April and October, and Kirby will mention more about that. After the JPA is established, additional formation tasks must ensue, which may take up to 12 months. So it's not an easy thing to get off the ground. So we want to have a recommended launch window and target that the interested partners should form. And we would like to get really good participation from all of our members. I know there's some questions here, but hopefully we can address those going forward so that we have as many participating up front in the initial startup. But there will also be an on-ramp later on. If somebody has questions or one of the entities might want to see how things go, they can always get back into the JPA at a later date. So best practices recommendations. So this deals with structure, governance, and operations. So the PDAC, after we got together and discussed this, we're recommending a regional standalone agency that includes as many of the MBCP, Monterey Bay Community Power, county and city partners as possible. The economy of scale relative to procurement, buying, power, startup, and long-term financing and other operational considerations makes a compelling case for a regional agency. So the scale is very important here. And then we also recommended that we have an equitable representation in alignment with population density and electricity usage within the region. So that's going to help inform the makeup of the governance. A manageable number of board members with the ability to scale up to accommodate later city and county members who do not choose to join the startup initially is important, but we want to have a manageable number. Those of you that have been on AMBAG, that's a monster. And so, it's not that nimble, and enough said on that. So we're looking into what that number should be for board members. But this can all change, too, so we're just setting the stage. Also, we want to see that the primary members and alternates should be elected officials. And then we expect to have an advisory committee made up of appointees of those elected officials, similar to what the air agency does, to help inform the board on technical issues and matters. And so, as I mentioned, the air district, it's not a surprise that we're looking at the air district as an example, because that air district has been operating for the past several decades under just this format. So the air district right now has 11 members representing the counties and cities within the 3-county region. We were thinking that this could go up to 15 or so members as well. So we're not putting a limit on the number of participants on the board or the advisory committee, but we think that the model for the air district has served us very well and could potentially serve the JPA very well in addition. So there's a lot of key guiding principles here, and I'm going to pull back the controls and take us up a little higher so I don't spend a lot of time, but I'll just touch on some of the key guiding principles that we've come up with. So the served community goals and local policy objectives, including greenhouse gas reductions and increased statewide and local renewable energy supply. Offer competitive rates and choice in customer electricity services that do not include the use of unbundled renewable energy credits, coal or nuclear resources, if you already heard, and then prioritizes in-state renewable contracts as they become financially viable and available. Support the rapid investment of local renewable energy generation to the maximum extent feasible while ensuring fiscal stability, rate parity, and carbon reduction goals. So a lot of this is policy, but we also definitely want to see that we're doing things that are financially responsible and protecting the JPA. As you heard, there will be a firewall between the participating members and that JPA as well. So I'll let you read some of these others, but this is my last slide. So this is a pop quiz for you guys. So I'll ask you, is a community choice energy right for us? So what the PDAC came up with is a resounding yes. And as I said, most of us were very skeptical going into this. We knew they did some kind of magic up in Marin, but when we came down here and really started putting pen to paper, we saw that this is a really great thing. I'm very excited about it. I would like our agency to perhaps invest in this because we could maybe get a good return on our investment. And I think this is the way of the future. So I know there's a lot of questions and you still have to satisfy those, but I just wanted to say that what is formatting or forming this CCE really mean for the region? So right now, we have 285,000 customers that spend $355 million per year on electricity, 30 of which comes from renewable sources like solar, wind, and biomass, and there's a requirement to do that, as you may know. Also, we can also double the use of renewable energy resources and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation by 70% and pay the same rate. So that's important. So, and then once we have the surplus revenues after full years of full operations, building organizational capacity and paying off startup debt, the study shows surplus revenues of $8 to $9.6 million annually. These funds can help build local renewable projects, create jobs, and even lower rates. So that's all going to be up to the governing board to consider. The Monterey Bay Community Power Partnership, formed in 2013, is the first tri-county, 18-city effort in the state, as you've already heard. So since then, we've had, as you've heard too, Sonoma Clean Power in the city of Lancaster, and more than 20 counties and cities actively pursuing this type of thing. So we're early in the game. We're not the pioneers, but certainly we can learn from what's been laid out before us. So with that, I'll finish up right now, and thank you for your time and consideration, and I think we'll have a chance for questions later on. I know you guys are going to probably have questions.
I got questions, 3 already.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol, go ahead. No, I can. Actually, let me ask a real simple question. When you did your study of feasibility report, real simple, I'll delete the other 2 questions. Answer this question. Did you take in consideration that the more vehicles are used by EV, the less money we get to fix our roads? Did you discuss that?
No, but that's regardless of the formation of the CCE or not. That's something that's right now Washington State is actually proposing legislation to charge a vehicle tax just for electric vehicles.
I'm all for that.
To make up the differences. So that's something that's occurring regardless. And but we do see that from an air quality perspective, 70% of our problem in these 3 counties is attributable to motor vehicle emissions. So if we can do something to help pay for that, we're going to have to realign how our taxation methods to have the user pay. And certainly electric vehicles use the road just as gas cars do. But that's something that's coming up, and I know California Air Resources Board is also looking to that, and there's been some legislation proposed in California to address that issue.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Munzer?
Yeah, actually, it's not a question. It's not a question for Rich. As you guys know, I love to put our staff on the hot seat, and I like to do that to Adam right now. Adam, you probably don't have to jump up. Well, maybe you do. You were part of which committee, the PDAC or the technical? So, okay. So what I would encourage, because Adam, in his previous life, before he left us, he was part of this study. I'm not sure if all of you knew that. And so if you have questions, he may be a local resource to go and have those questions answered.
Yeah,
so
except for whatever happened
you on
over
the hot
last
seat.
year. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Good to know. Thank you. Carol?
Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Kirby DeSalle, who's Vice President of Pacific Energy Advisors. His company worked on the technical study, and again, you can find that online because he's just going to give you a high overview of that technical study today. But again, you can find it at mbcommunitypower.org. Kirby has also been the technical consultant with Marin Clean Power and Marin Clean Energy and Sonoma Clean Power. So Kirby, I'll turn it over to you.
I just keep clicking through, page down, that'll work. Fantastic. Good afternoon, supervisors. As mentioned, my name is Kirby DeSalle, and we had the pleasure of working with staff and the PDAC on performing this technical study for the Monterey Bay Community Power Program. Let me get to see if the next presentation is up here. Which one is this?
The next presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. Third one, right?
Yeah, please. All right. There we go.
Here you go.
Fantastic. Okay, and we've done a number of these before, really working up and down the state, dating back to when the California Energy Commission, shortly after the state passed this legislation, decided to oversee a pilot program to determine what level of interest might actually exist within the state of California to pursue community choice as an energy service alternative. And we're involved in that pilot program and have since completed a number of these studies. And as mentioned, we've worked with Marin Clean Energy, Sonoma Clean Power, Lancaster Choice Energy, and also more recently with Clean Power SF, which started serving customers in the city and county of San Francisco on May 1. Hopefully today this will give you a bit of a flavor for the technical study, really a Cliff Notes version, if you will. The study is rather lengthy. It's fairly detailed, provides a lot of background and kind of threads together many important topics related to this particular type of program. And I also wanted to point out, just before we get started here, that municipally operated energy organizations are not particularly unique in this state. Municipal utilities exist up and down, south to north, Los Angeles, Turlock, Modesto, Sacramento, Redding, Lassen, they're all over the place. That just names a few. And they're really wildly successful. It's a slightly different model than we're talking about here. In the true municipal utility model, the poles and wires, the distribution system is owned by the municipality, maintained by the municipality. We're talking really about a bifurcated service model here where that responsibility for maintaining the poles and wires remains with PG&E, and then the generation, procurement, planning, that function is the one overseen by the CCE. So why complete one of these things? We know the concept is feasible. It's been done 4 times successfully. There's another program waiting to launch in October of this year. It works. There's no doubt about that. But you have unique goals and objectives. Those were framed very nicely. They came out of the PDAC discussions and also discussions with staff specific to your economic objectives, not just in terms of rate-related comparisons, but also with overall economic development benefits that might be created regionally through this sort of program. Also wanted to get a better understanding of how it is that environmental impacts might result from this particular type of program, GHG emissions reductions in particular, as well as increased use of renewable energy throughout the region. Again, looking at economic development impacts, that was something that was pretty important and identified early on as a key element of this study. This study was completed, I think it's worth pointing out, based on best available information at the time the study was completed. Best available market prices, best available information regarding PG&E rates, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, within the electric utility industry, things are subject to sudden and significant changes. We've seen this in the past. We may see it again, but we're in a very nice period of stability right now in terms of wholesale market pricing. It's been existing for about 36 months, give or take, and looks to continue on that track for the foreseeable future. So at the end of the day, this study was prepared to really inform a go, no-go decision, whether or not you all choose to move forward with this, whether or not additional municipalities choose to move forward with this, and really present an unbiased look at how this sort of program might operate financially, environmentally, et cetera. This isn't intended to be a detailed business plan for all of the different complementary energy programs that you may choose to pursue, things like energy efficiency, demand response, net energy metering, feed-in tariffs. Those items and programs are all contemplated within the general framework of the study. There are budgetary parameters that are reflected in the study to accommodate those sorts of programs, but the specific elements of those plans and programs have yet to be detailed and would ultimately be defined after the board is formed and the governing board has an opportunity to discuss those items. 3 indicative supply scenarios were analyzed as part of the study. Those aren't representative of the full breadth and scope of options that are available to you. It's almost limitless. But we, through conversations with the PDAC and staff, identified 3 different portfolios of interest that were looked at more closely as part of this particular study. So how do we do this? This flow chart kind of distills down the work that we completed as part of this process, starting with developing a really detailed understanding of the manner in which your customers use electric power. It's fundamental here. We don't understand that. We don't know how to buy power, when to buy power, or what sort of power we need to buy. So we got historical data as provided by Pacific Gas and Electric Company. We took that data, distilled it down, built it out for all of the customers within the region, and used that to inform a supply portfolio analysis, a rate analysis, and ultimately a pro forma financial analysis for the program at large over a 10-year operating period. And that was the period that was contemplated for the technical study. I mentioned before that an economic impact analysis was completed using publicly available models that were created by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to basically address this very sort of thing. They've got a number of different models. They're all technology specific. solar, wind, geothermal, for example, and through the use of those models, you get a pretty good idea for what sort of jobs impacts and economic growth could be reasonably expected by promoting and supporting renewable project development. And at the end of the day, all that information was folded into this 110-plus page technical study. And hopefully, if you haven't already, you'll take a look at it, because we'll only touch on a very small number of items that are listed in that report. I'm also going to apologize now. And the reason I'm going to apologize because we're going to have some slides where the text is very small. And I'll make sure to point out pertinent items for you there. But I think if you're looking across the room, hopefully you can all see it. If I was sitting over there, I'd probably have trouble, so I just bring that up now. But all the information that is included here is also included in the technical study. Some of the tables, in fact, are direct excerpts from the study, so feel free to bring those up at your leisure. And I think, as pointed out, staff and supporting cast, if you will, would be happy to come back and answer questions if you have them. So in framing these different supply scenarios, how do we go about doing this? Well, clearly this is a business much like many others where there are trade-offs involved in how it is that you make your resource selections. Renewable energy, typically more expensive than conventional power. If you fold more of that into your supply portfolio, costs go up. As a result, rates go up. If you fold in complementary energy programs and intend to administer those over time, things like energy efficiency, net energy metering, that takes expertise, staff time, and generally adds some administrative complexity. So we tried to balance those considerations in framing the different supply scenarios that were analyzed here. So I mentioned the first key piece of the puzzle in completing the technical study was understanding the manner in which your customers use electric power. And this is a really good starting point. It's a high-level summary. You can see here in this top table that there are kind of two key segments. One, and it represents the substantial majority of your customer base, those are bundled PG&E customers, meaning those customers take both generation and distribution service from the incumbent utility. That represents nearly all but rounding error, to be perfectly honest, of the total customer count, and almost 93% of energy use within the region. There are, however, a relatively small subset of customers that take electric service on an alternative arrangement called direct access. These are typically larger customers, commercial and industrial, that have specific one-to-one contracts with energy suppliers. As I mentioned, because those customers tend to be larger and more energy intensive, even though they represent only 0.2% of your total customer base, they represent over 7% of your total energy use within the region. And I bring those customers up because they are excluded from this analysis. Reason being, because they already have these contracts in place, because they've already committed to buying power from a third-party supplier, there's no need to include them. We don't want to violate their contracts, and we certainly don't want to charge them twice. Bottom table here is a more detailed breakout by typical rate designations within the electric utility industry. You can see here, starting with residential, moving through the commercial classifications, and then ending with ag and street lighting, how it is that the customer account composition within the Tri-County area really breaks out. 86% of your total customer accounts exist within the residential classification. However, those 86% of customers only account for 36% of the total electric energy use, so not very energy intensive, relatively speaking. By comparison, all of the commercial classifications as well as the industrial classification represent only 12% of the total accounts in the region, but nearly 47% of total energy use. As you'd reasonably expect, because those operations are more energy intensive, those ratios are going to be different, residential versus commercial. And also you can see here, and you're probably very familiar with this, the Tri-County region is a little bit different than some of the others in the state in the sense that there is fairly intensive energy use within the agricultural sector, 2% of total accounts, but 18% of total energy use. So I think that's relevant, not just for this discussion, but also the planning discussions and rate setting discussions that will ultimately follow once this agency is formed. In terms of the distribution within the Tri-County area, you can see here in the pie chart, green representing Monterey County, yellow representing Santa Cruz County, and blue representing San Benito County, the proportion of electric consumption as well as accounts that are represented within each one of those counties. In the case of San Benito here, you can see 9% of electricity consumption occurs within this particular county, including the municipalities located therein, and then 7% of total accounts. Won't spend too much time here. This is really just a graphical representation of the table that we saw 2 slides ago, looking at the different breakouts of residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and street lighting. And you can see here, just focusing on the residential classification for a second, you can see the large blue pie slice in each one of these pie charts. On the left, 36% of total consumption represented by the residential sector, 86% of total accounts. And then the colors are kind of correlated there, of course, amongst the other classifications. Another hard-to-read slide, but I'll kind of help get to the point here. This is there are 21 communities within the Tri-County area that were studied here. Of those 21, the 5 largest communities account for 71% of total electric consumption and 67% of total accounts. I think just a couple of local examples here. So San Benito County and Hollister, I think rank, if I'm looking at this right, 7th and 8th in terms of overall electric consumption, and then generally fall in the middle in terms of the distribution of customer accounts. So just give you an idea, kind of orient the local communities there in terms of the aggregate. Okay, so I mentioned we looked at 3 different supply scenarios, so we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about what those scenarios entailed and then what the results looked like over that 10-year planning period. Just worth pointing out here that...
Sir, you want to hold on a minute? We're going to take before you go into the 3 scenarios, we're just going to take a quick 5-minute break.
Sure.
And then you can go into the scenarios in depth without any interruption.
Fair enough.
We'll do that.
In all three supply scenarios that were constructed for purposes of the technical study, unbundled renewable energy certificates were excluded. Short, brief comment on unbundled renewable energy certificates. They're allowed for use under California's RPS program, that's Renewables Portfolio Standard Program, but generally they've been a lightning rod for criticism and debate over the last few years, particularly with CCE programs. So they were avoided for that reason. Nuclear and coal-based energy sources were also avoided in constructing the supply scenarios. And then the last item here I think is pretty important. Each one of the supply scenarios reflects a very significant commitment to renewable energy build-out within the state of California. And of course that would be a key driver for the jobs and economic development benefits that we'll talk about a little bit later. So with regard to the three scenarios, the first two are relatively similar, with the key similarity being that these scenarios were constructed with rate parity in mind. At no point during the 10-year study period on a projected basis would rates of the MBCP program go above those on a projected basis for PG&E. The key distinction between scenarios 1 and 2 being the location of the renewable energy resources that would be used to achieve the desired environmental objectives. Under scenario 1, those renewable energy resources would be substantially located within the state of California, period. Under scenario 2, those renewable energy resources would be located both within the state of California and then also regionally outside of the state in locations like Washington and Oregon, Wyoming and such in the western United States where renewable energy is generally abundant. Scenario 3, a little bit different. Scenario 3, the key objective there was to maximize rate competitiveness, see how low we can drive down costs while still maintaining a 25% GHG emission reduction relative to the incumbent utility during each year of the 10-year study period. So those were the three scenarios. And I'm really going to kind of go through the next slides quickly and may not spend much time on them at all, as a matter of fact, because these are merely visual representations in year one for the resource mix associated with each one of the supply scenarios. And if you take a moment on your own, or just as I'm clicking through them now, you can see that this large green slice, which represents the renewable energy component, you can see how that changes in each one of the supply scenarios. And of course, when you get to scenario 3 here, it's got the smallest slice of renewables being the most costly. By reducing the use of renewables and kind of changing out the use of larger hydroelectric resources, which are GHG free but relatively cost competitive, you can drive costs down and create customer savings in that way. So these tables here, there's two. This is a year 1 summary. The next slide is a year 10 summary, and it really walks you through kind of key elements of the technical study. It's really the technical study in a nutshell, if you will. Talks a little bit here about the renewable energy composition and carbon-free composition of each supply scenario. In year 1, scenario 1 being 59% renewable, 70% GHG free, with that difference between the 59 and 70% created through the use of larger hydroelectric resources that could be located regionally, namely in the Pacific Northwest or potentially in the state of California. Scenario 2, entirely renewable supply portfolio, 71% of the total. So that's 21% higher than the 2030 procurement mandate that's recently been imposed by the state of California. Very high level of renewable energy content. And then scenario 3, the renewable energy content is set more at a level that's reflective of the compliance obligation, in this case 28%, but supplementing that renewable supply with some additional carbon-free supply from large hydroelectric generators. You can see in that second row, rate parity is the goal, and that's what was reflected in the study results. Moving over to scenario 3, though, with the goal being to drive down costs as low as possible, we were able to achieve a 3% rate savings while still getting that 25% GHG reduction in year 1. So what does this mean to the average residential customer within the Tri-County area? Under scenarios 1 and 2, if you have rate parity, costs are the same. No bill impact. Under scenario 3, with that 3% savings, it translates into a roughly $3 per month average monthly savings for a typical residential customer. Participation rates throughout the study were assumed to be 85%. So that means 15% of the customers were assumed to opt out and remain with the incumbent utility. That number was informed by basically our direct experience working with each one of California's operating CCE programs, including those in Marin and Sonoma in particular. What we've learned is that as successive CCE programs launch, these opt-out rates continue to fall. And I think we heard that from one of the earlier speakers about the more recent programs receiving very, very low levels of opt-out, just 2 to 5%, for example. And then the bottom line here, what happens on the environmental front.
Can you hold it a minute?
Yes.
Supervisor Patello?
One real quick question, because I have different rates being in agriculture. I use a Ag 4A rate. How does this impact those type of discounted rates?
Great question. Okay, and thank you for asking that, because it's really important to understand that. For purposes of the technical study, when we say rate parity was achieved here in that second row, that means rate parity for all tariff designations, inclusive of residential, commercial, ag, everyone, okay. Right? So the same can be said under scenario 3. So if we move over and we look at that 3% savings metric, that's that savings percentage that's to be reflected in all tariff designations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So across the board there on the bottom in terms of GHG emission savings, 20% in year 1 under scenario 1, same level of savings under scenario 2. Under scenario 3, it's a bit higher at 25%. Of course, over the 10-year study period, the idea is to keep infusing additional renewable energy volumes, additional clean energy supplies into the portfolio, so you can see that the upward tick here in both renewable energy and GHG-free content in year 10, moving to 85% in scenario 1, 90% in scenario 2. And then scenario 3, again, with the goal being cost competitiveness, the renewable energy content is still relatively high at 44%, as well as the GHG-free content at 81%, but not as high as scenarios 1 or 2. Under those first 2 scenarios, we're looking at rate competitiveness, actually reflecting a moderate level of savings, 1%. Scenario 3, quite a bit more at 5% across the board. For a typical residential customer, that level of saving translates into about $1.60 a month in terms of a bill impact. Under scenario 1, about $1.80 a month under scenario 2, and a little over $6 a month under scenario 3. So again, average monthly savings for a typical residential customer.
I got a question.
Of course.
And I know the answer's got to be yes. So I must ask a dumb question. That's on the assumption that in reference to you have a base year line of like, for example, our company is a 8-10 rate. So because of that, rate stays the same over 10 years. You're taking into consideration that the PG&E will also go increase, right?
That's correct. So that's actually a really good question. And so what happened in crafting this technical study and performing the analysis that was underlying the study is we performed a forecasting effort, not just for the MBCP program rates, but also for PG&E rates. We know where they are now. We know the regulatory mandates that are going to affect their procurement decisions going forward. And so those rates were projected into the future. Of course, we also have a body of data historically informing that forecast as well. So that was used to project out PG&E rates into the future. And then, of course, the MBC rates were based on
Can
costs.
you recall what rate you used for the adjustment inflator for PG&E?
I believe it's about a 2.5%. Yeah,
because I've heard stories, it's going to be 10%. You know how salespeople
Well, it goes up and down.
Solar panels, they say, okay, you're going to be a 5%, 10%, and my personal PG&E bill hasn't been double.
No, in rates typically over time, that simple upward trajectory, that average trajectory, rarely do rate impacts and changes directly coincide with that. So, you'll get some up, some down, but on average, that's what we're looking at. So, and then just kind of shifting to the bottom line for a minute here, again, environmental impacts. over the 10-year period, as additional clean energy supplies are infused in the portfolio, you can see that the impacts there on the environmental front jump up as well. 42% GHG savings under scenario 1, 62% under scenario 2, and then with that flat line 25% being the goal under scenario 3, that was also achieved in year 10, just as with every other year of the study. So that's kind of those two slides highlight the front end and the back end of the forecasting period. Switching over here briefly to the financial projections, I know this is probably very important to y'all. Top two lines are primarily focused on some key inputs to the program operations, number of customer accounts, annual energy sales, and then, of course, what does it cost to operate the program? About $240 million a year under Scenario 1 and Scenario 2. The substantial majority of that cost, of course, being buying the actual electric power itself. Under Scenario 3, cost is less because we've got less renewable energy supply. We've opted for a slightly cheaper clean energy alternative in the form of hydroelectricity, so the operating cost there is about $213 million. As part of the pro forma projections here, we've planned for a 4% operating reserve, so that's a contribution made annually, accruing over time. Base is 4% of costs, so you can see here with the cost being similar under scenarios 1 and 2, we've got similar contributions to reserve, $9.6 million. Costs being lower under scenario 3 result in contribution to reserves a little bit lower there. Total revenue requirement is simply the sum of the operating costs and the reserve contribution, with the residual being the bottom line. And it's important here to kind of just take a quick look at this, because under scenarios 1 and 2, the goal was rate parity, so we really don't have much difference relative to the incumbent utility. However, under scenario 3, where we were really trying to drive down costs as low as possible, we've got $28 million of lower costs that can be passed through to the customer in terms of rate savings. They can be used to launch new programs and administer those programs, such as energy efficiency, or they could be used to do a combination of both. Or a third option would be socking those away as additional reserves. So you have flexibility. Whenever there's that margin that's created, you can give it back to the customer in the form of savings, give it back to the community in terms of program administration, or put it away as a rate stabilization fund or additional reserves for the program. So you have some flexibility there. And then in terms of a summary of the environmental impacts, this is a 10-year average. I think the second row is always kind of a fun one to look at. If you go onto the EPA's website, they've got a greenhouse gas equivalency calculator, and you can put in the amount of emissions associated with a particular initiative, and it'll kick out various kind of fun metrics as to what that equates to in terms of cars taken off the road or various things. And so you can see here what these emissions impacts equate to in terms of getting autos off the road. Over the 10-year period, you're looking at a 36% electric sector GHG emission reduction for Scenario 1, 57% for Scenario 2, and 25%, again, flat line throughout the study period for Scenario 3. And those numbers are based on the relative emissions intensity of the projected MVCP supply portfolio, as well as the projected supply portfolio for PG&E. Just really quickly here on economic development benefits. I mentioned before that there were specific new renewable generators that were assumed to be supported by the contracting efforts of the MVCP program, very consistent with what we've seen thus far with California's operating CCEs. A variety of different technology types are represented here and project sizes, resulting in about 340 megawatts of new renewable generation being developed within the state of California. 20 of those megawatts are currently targeted for development locally. Could be more. As I understand it, you may have land. If you have that land, that could certainly be used for additional project development, but that's up to you to decide at the end of the day. But this table here is essentially the basis for framing the economic development impacts. Again, more small print here. Takeaway from this slide is that there are very considerable construction period benefits related to each one of these renewable projects. And when you take those in aggregate over the construction period, you're looking at about 9,000 to 11,000 construction period jobs that would be created through these new renewable generating projects. Again, these numbers are based on output from the National Renewable Energy Laboratories models that have been developed for this purpose. About 500 to 650 million in earnings for those different laborers, and then through economic multipliers, about 1.2 to 1.4 billion in economic activity directly related to these renewable generating projects. To what extent that actually occurs within the Tri-County area is likely dependent upon what proportion of those projects are developed within the Tri-County area. Some of the economic activity will inevitably occur elsewhere because of the supply chain associated with these renewable generating projects. Solar panels probably aren't manufactured here. Wind turbine blades probably aren't manufactured here. But the labor to put that steel in the ground, if you will, and maintain it over time could certainly be the local labor force put to work. During the operating years, renewable generators tend to require not a whole lot of maintenance. Solar panels, for example, don't have many moving parts, so you don't need to do much to keep them going. So the ongoing job benefits associated with those projects are a little less dramatic. About 135 to 185 jobs maintained annually over the life cycle of these projects, $8 to $14 million in earnings for that labor, with about $20 to $30 million of total economic activity created by those new jobs that would be needed in order to maintain those projects. And then in terms of staff, we estimate between startup and then ramp up to full-scale operations, about 8 to 30 employees could be working for the MVCP organization, doing everything from administrative functions, planning and procurement, regulatory work, which is very important in this space, and the like. Won't spend too much time here. This is just a little bit more information on the study. I think something of interest is that PV solar projects tend to create the largest number of construction period jobs, but as I mentioned, a very small number of operating period jobs. Go ahead and move past this in the interest of time. So we also wanted to spend a little bit of time just looking at the risks that can pop up. You can imagine in the electric utility industry, very dynamic risks exist, and I think it's important to kind of look at those front and center. This is a summary of some of the key risks, PG&E rates being one of those. PG&E rates do change from year to year and sometimes on an inter-year basis as well. It's also been mentioned that we're in a prolonged period of kind of very low wholesale electric prices right now. That's been going on for a few years, and it looks to continue for the foreseeable future. There's really an abundance of domestically produced natural gas right now, which has held prices very low, and natural gas prices are the key driver of electric power prices. So I think that's good news for energy buyers. And then one of the concerns I think that's very relevant here, particularly for a program with very ambitious environmental objectives in terms of GHG savings, that's the availability of large hydroelectric power. As more and more CCEs form with similar environmental objectives and compete for finite resources, what does that do to pricing? What does that do to supply? And it could very well be the case that some of these CCE programs need to evaluate trade-offs between pursuing hydroelectricity and buying more renewable energy, which is a suitable alternative from a GHG perspective. Credit is always an issue at startup. Opt-out rates, we're starting to learn quite a bit about those, and they're definitely declining as more programs launch. Of course, legislation and regulatory issues always pop up, and one of the key strategies there in mitigating those risks is securing competent representation in the regulatory arena, whether that's through staff attorneys or outside counsel, lobbyists at the legislature. Those have all been effective strategies used by California's operating CCAs to make sure that the fires stay put out, if you will. Okay, so I'd focus your attention briefly on the yellow highlighted cells, and in particular, I'd point out that the yellow highlighted cells represent the minority on this matrix. And that's important because those yellow highlighted cells represent instances in which, under various stress cases, MVCP rates could tick up higher than projected PG&E rates. So across the top of the grid here, you can see different sensitivity scenarios that we looked at as part of the study, trying to understand what if the worst case situation happens? What if gas prices go up by 50%? What if PG&E rates drop by an unexpected amount? What if renewable energy prices go through the roof and the like? And so we looked at each one of those different instances to determine what effect does that have on the rate relationship between PG&E and the MBCP program. And really the only areas that created concerns were instances in which renewable energy prices jumped up massively. And in those instances, it's reasonable to assume, based on MBCP's planned use of considerable renewable energy resources, that those rates of the program might tick up slightly above PG&E's. Similarly, these exit fees that we talked about before, if those go up much higher than expected, it could be the case that that stresses that relationship somewhat, imposing slightly higher costs on the MBCP customers relative to PG&E. But on net, I think it's safe to say here that even under some very unlikely stress scenarios that were analyzed here, MBCP customers remain rate competitive throughout the study period. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up now. I think that really, the technical study, it really proved out yet again that this is a very viable program on a lot of fronts, not just in terms of the environmental benefits that could be created, but also on a rate competitive basis as well. You're not limited to the supply scenarios that were analyzed here. You really have an infinite number of options that you could pursue. So I would just leave you with that I think you've got the potential for a very successful program here, and you still have a lot of decisions to make in front of you in terms of how you frame that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
No, none at this time. Thank you. That was very comprehensive.
Supervisor Munzer?
None.
Supervisor Batalo?
No, I had a few questions I asked when we were on break. I did not waste time.
Good man. Good man. I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You have a question?
Questions from the public? Speaker cards?
But we still...
speaker cards, Mr. Vice Chair.
Anyone from the public? Anyone from the public? Tony?
Quick question for you.
Tony, you want to do me a favor? You want to come to the podium, please? Thank you.
Do we still have the legal counsel here? No, this person right here.
Tony Bach, City Councilman, San Juan Bautista. One quick question. Presuming that everybody went 100% renewable energy, all right, and all these different organizations got together, what is the incentive for PG&E to maintain their infrastructure? I just would like an answer to that question. Thank you.
Good question, Tony. Thank you.
Okay, so just real quickly in response to that, I think first and foremost, it's worth pointing out that PG&E, as part of every customer, whether they're CCE, direct access, or bundled, taking both delivery and generation service from PG&E, they all pay a distribution charge. PG&E gets a regulated return on all of its capital investments, and will continue to collect those distribution charges regardless of the decisions that are ultimately made by customers. So I think there is still an incentive to do good work in that regard, and in fact, I think there's a standard of behavior and care from an operations and maintenance perspective that doesn't allow them to differentiate service between customers taking MBCP service, for example, or PG&E service. So I do think through the collection of those charges that they get every month on their bill for delivery and maintenance of the system, they do have an ongoing incentive to do good work in that regard.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Okay. Carol? Do we have the legal counsel person here?
Actually, David Silberman wasn't able to attend, but we do have Sean Marshall who's going to speak on the legal aspects of it.
If you want me to, I can make it very short.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to set up the fourth presentation.
I think fifth.
Fifth one. Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Nope, next one. I'm so sorry.
sorry.
It's the legal. I think that's last.
Legal was the fourth one that I got
excuse me.
covered. No problem. There you go.
Okay. So I know that you all want to wrap this up, so I'm going to abbreviate this conversation, starting off with an invitation to join the governance subcommittee because we're going to be dealing with a lot of these issues. So this will not be your last bite at the apple. So this first slide just basically is meant to illustrate that the statute that enables this program is relatively straightforward and simple. It really is not terribly complicated at all. There are statutory requirements that are specified in AB 117. Most of these we've already talked about today. There's just really a couple that I'll highlight, one of which is there are minimum notification requirements for customer notification prior to and after enrollment. So the goal here is not to surprise the customers in any way. So there are minimum requirements. Some CCEs exceed them. It's also important to note that the program is required to serve all residential customers who don't opt out. It can also serve municipal and commercial accounts, but it's primarily a residential program with these other account types added on per statute. We've already talked about the utility cost recovery that's required by statute, and that all customer classes must be treated fairly. So there's some language around that. And then we've talked about that there are certain requirements of CCEs at the California Public Utilities Commission. There's an extremely simple ordinance that goes with this. It's about a page and a half, pretty boilerplate at this point. This is a link to San Mateo County's ordinance if you guys would like to take a look at it. One of the issues that often comes up is whether or not the JPA is required to, or the implementation plan requires a CEQA analysis. And the legal response to that has been no, that the formation of a JPA does not trigger a project under CEQA. But what the JPAs have done is to issue a categorical exemptions. If the CCA enters into an agreement with a developer of a project, that project developer needs to go through all of the same requirements for EIR, CEQA, interconnection. That remains with the developer, not with the JPA. So that's a quick overview on CEQA compliance. We are contemplating governance through a joint powers agency. So I won't belabor all of this other than to say that these are some of the things that we'll be talking about in the governance subcommittee. Board representation, how we want to structure some of the voting requirements. That's likely to be a two-tiered voting structure, et cetera, et cetera. One of the reasons why we think the JPA is the way to go for a multi-jurisdictional effort is, again, this sort of protection between the assets and liabilities of the agency and those of the member jurisdiction. So really maintaining that firewall. Biggest governance issue is, who's in control, what's your board composition going to look like. So over the summer, we'll be talking about the two-tiered voting structure that is one vote, one municipality, and then followed up by a weighted voting structure based on a load and population size. And we can talk more about that later. These are just some of the issues that San Mateo County included in their JPA agreement. Most of the CCEs have started with existing JPA models. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. There is an escape hatch exit provision so that if the CCA program is not able to achieve its objectives of cost competitiveness, increased renewables, lower GHGs, then the jurisdictions have the option to leave the JPA prior to launch with no obligation whatsoever. So it's kind of a little bit of an insurance policy. If those objectives can't be met, the program won't go forward. There are board alternates. I won't belabor all of this, but there are certain things that these are the kinds of things that we'll be reviewing when we put together the JPA agreement, hopefully in a collaborative style. So power contracting issues, it is done in open meetings of the board of the JPA. There are some elements of contracting that are proprietary because you're in negotiations and all of that. And there are commercial terms like price that is not known to the public necessarily, but the board will provide direction on those things, and you'll have indicative pricing to work from. That's a little bit down in the weeds, but there is sort of this balance between the Brown Act and power negotiation that goes on. Miscellaneous items, a resolution to allow for appointment and the hiring of staff. You will be dealing with employment policies, salaries, benefit, insurance. What kind of insurance do you guys want? Conflict of interest code is pretty standard. And then, of course, you have to register your JPA with the Secretary of State. A lot of this now is really quite standardized in terms of methodology and process. So that's it on the very fast legal overview.
Thank you. Supervisor Patella?
Yeah, this has been well worth the time. I really appreciate everybody coming down and explaining this program. In principle, I'm very, very supportive. I think the partnership makes sense. My experience being on the board has been very positive working with Santa Cruz County and Monterey County in the past. And I think something like this where we could provide good, clean, renewable energy at parity. But hopefully, in my opinion, I don't see why at some point in the future it would be more cost efficient in the long run. I think Samuel County needs to be at the table, right at the front end, and work with our potential future partners. So I hope. This is not unheard of, as far as alternative energies being delivered outside of PG&E. When I was at Modesto Junior College 30 years ago, Modesto Irrigation District sent the energy bill, and at a substantial cheaper rate than PG&E. So I know it could be done through other agencies, but with PG&E being somewhat of a partner in this. But let's see what else I have here as my notes. But I think one of the concerns that we expressed a little earlier about Samuel County maybe having the sunshine for solar panels more so than Santa Cruz County or Monterey County. That's an advantage. That is great. We want the solar panels here. We want the jobs here. We want the investment here. And I think it's an opportunity to get something accomplished through an economic of scale. So I hope we go in this direction and the two cities follow suit. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Supervisor Munzer?
I guess my question, are we having another?
Yeah, we have another presentation.
Okay, then I'll hold off my.
Oh, I thought we were on discussion.
It's literally going to be the fastest financial
remarks.
overview.
I won't call.
Don't leave.
Yeah, don't leave. Yeah, don't leave. All right. Okay.
Sorry, I'm surprised you let me do that.
No, it was so good, Anthony.
Finance and credit, here's Kirby.
Yeah. Okay, so just really quickly, very important topic, but at the same time, the information that we're going to see here is based on assumptions that were made in completing the technical study that may not represent reality someday. So, and what I mean by that is, I don't mean that anything was inaccurate. What I mean is that you may choose to bring on your customers differently than we assumed under the technical study. Under the technical study, we assumed that you'd bring on 33% of your customers on day one, 33% of your customers a year thereafter, and the last third of your customers in the 25th month of operation. So when we talk about financing and the needs related to financing, bear in mind that you could choose to phase in your customers differently over a different timeline, different proportions, different rate groups, et cetera. But in terms of the financing discussion, clearly to get these programs up and running, you have a need for some capital. You're going to incur some expenses to get the program up and running. You're going to need to negotiate power supply agreements, joint powers agreements, potentially hire staff, do some of the groundwork needed to get these programs off the ground. You're also going to need to secure working capital to pay for the power in consideration of the fact that you won't receive revenues from customers by the time that the payment for that power is due. Over time, that resolves itself. but during the startup period, that's something that you'll need to address. And then, of course, there will be some reserve deposits that will likely be required by your power suppliers just to make sure that there's money in the bank in the event that something were to go wrong. The sources of that financing, pretty straightforward, and I think you're familiar with most of them here: bank loans, letters, lines of credits, and then, of course, member contributions. This has been a very common way that the operating CCE programs have raised funds, and then those contributions were paid back not too long thereafter, within the first few years of operations. Here's kind of a roster of the startup costs that are anticipated to get the Tri-County program up off the ground. Again, this assumes that all of the 21 jurisdictions would participate. To the extent that it was a smaller level of participation, these costs would scale down as well. Key line items here are clearly staff, and then the various support in the form of attorneys and consultants that you may choose to engage to help work with you in negotiating those power supply agreements, framing what the volumes of energy and the products that you'll be procuring actually are, and the like. But those are really kind of the highlights here. $2.25 million in aggregate for the startup costs. In addition to those startup costs, I mentioned working capital. So working capital, again, needed to pay power suppliers before you receive revenues from customers. There is also a couple of other items here that are subsumed in the working capital estimates, inclusive of deposits with the grid operator in the state, that's the CAISO, or California Independent System Operator, as well as an assumed reserve deposit that would be required by a supplier, your primary energy supplier, of $2.25 million. This assumption here, again, is based on a particular phase-in plan that you may deviate from. If you chose to go with the smaller first phase, the capital requirements would go down. Depending on the time of year in which you launch, that could influence your working capital requirements as well. Key distinction there being, if you launch in winter, rates are relatively low, particularly for commercial customers, so rates and costs are going to be more closely aligned. If you launch in summer, when rates are comparatively higher, you've got more margin to work with. So kind of the timing of that equation is relevant here. We assumed a 60-day payment term, which has been successfully negotiated by the other CCAs. Industry standard is, however, 30, and if you're only able to get that, working capital goes up. It's a large program, sizable working capital requirement, but again, through modifications of the phase-in schedule, you can manage this down to be more, I guess, palatable, if that's the right word. So moving forward, what sort of things need to be addressed? Clearly, you need to identify who these prospective financiers may be, whether or not guarantees may be offered for loans, who's going to be the guarantor, timing of service commencement. Again, I mentioned the seasonal differences in rates, so that's relevant. And then ultimately what the phase-in schedule is. Depending on how you chop it up, these numbers will change. But I think it's just important to give you a flavor for what this looks like, acknowledging that this is an unresolved issue presently, and it will change over time based on the decisions that the governing body makes. That's all I had for you.
Thank you. Supervisor Munster?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I want to echo Supervisor Bertello's comments that I think we definitely need to stay engaged in this. Even though I've heard this presentation or a shorter version of it, more questions have arisen, some of which Mark answered in the break. You know, I was concerned about, it sounded like this was going to be shoved down the ratepayers' throats, but he mentioned, and then it was presented in the presentation, that communication would have to be done with the ratepayers so that they'll know about it. But I think it's very important that we stay involved over the summer. We're not signing on the dotted line anytime soon, but we need to hear more about how this unfolds. And so I would definitely support us as a county, and I hope our two cities would also stay involved in this process and see how it plays out. Because we've already been involved, as I wanted to point out, you know, we've had staff. Adam was part of the committee that was working on this. So I think we need to continue down that road and see how it plays out. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'll have tons of questions, tons of concerns on it, and I'm just sharing my honest opinion about the program. I'm very, very concerned about it. I even if if I don't get support from the board, I will become more active in their meetings and all that stuff to make sure that it's in the best interest of San Benito County. Anyone from the public wish to address the board? None? Carol.
So, just to wrap it all up, thank you everyone for your time today. Next steps. So, as was alluded to earlier, we will be meeting in the month of July. Invitations will be going out next week to county administrative officers and the the city managers of the 21 participating agencies to invite them or their executive staff to the ad hoc committees for finance and governance in July. So we will be having experts at the table to answer ongoing questions and concerns. We'll probably have 2 to 3 meetings, and then with the goal of bringing those recommendations from those meetings back to your board for approval in the in September of this year. So again, any questions, you can go to our website, montereycommunitypower.org. Send us an email. There are question cards out in the lobby still, I believe. So if you have anything as you're leaving, you want to fill out a card, we can send you a response back over the next week.
Okay, thank you, Kara. Before we conclude and ask for a motion to adjourn, Luis or Ray says here that the Board of Supervisors, and the Mayor and the City Council will not meet, right? It's to be determined, right?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, what's the pleasure of the board?
Move to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carries. Thank you for coming.